Hey there. Couldn't sleep? It's okay, you're in the right place, just a small favor. Did you know 89% watch without subscribing? If you enjoy this, I'd really appreciate your support. And let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it? Thanks for being here. The job posting had been simple enough. Park ranger position, Glacier National Park, Montana. Remote duty station. Winter coverage essential. Housing provided. What it didn't mention was the isolation. What it couldn't convey was the weight of silence that pressed down on you when you were 40 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but ancient pines and mountains that seemed to watch your every move. My name is Jacob Reeves, and I took this job because I needed to disappear. Not from the law or anything dramatic like that, from myself, really. From the wreckage of a marriage that had imploded slowly over 3 years. From a desk job in Seattle that was grinding my soul into powder. From the constant noise of a life that had stopped making sense somewhere along the way. The Park Service interview had been conducted over video call. The regional supervisor, a weathered man named Vernon Drake, had been blunt about the position. "You'll be stationed at Makwa Lake," he'd said, the name rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "It's Ojibwe, means bear. The ranger cabin there is our most remote posting. You'll handle trail maintenance, visitor contacts when they come through, which isn't often in winter, and wildlife monitoring. You'll have a satellite phone for emergencies, but cell service is non-existent. Radio range is limited. You comfortable with that level of isolation?" I'd said yes without hesitation. Isolation sounded like paradise. That was 3 weeks ago. Now, standing on the porch of the Makwa Lake cabin with my backpack at my feet and the November wind cutting through my coat, paradise felt more like exile. The cabin itself was solid enough, a Forest Service standard A-frame with a stone fireplace, propane heater, and solar panels that would give me minimal electricity through the darker months. The lake stretched out before me, a sheet of dark water beginning to skim with ice along the shoreline. Beyond it, the forest rose in waves of evergreen, ridge after ridge disappearing into the gray sky. I spent the first day settling in, inventorying supplies, familiarizing myself with the radio equipment. The previous ranger had left detailed notes, meteorological observations, wildlife sightings, maintenance schedules. The handwriting was precise, almost obsessive in its detail, but there were gaps in the log. Days where no entries had been made at all. The last entry was dated October 15th, 2 weeks before I'd arrived. Something wrong with the elk. Third herd observed with abnormal behavior. Individuals standing motionless for hours, non-responsive to approach. Recommend avoid direct contact. I made a note to ask Vernon about it during my next radio check-in. That first night, I built a fire and sat by the window, watching darkness consume the forest. The silence was profound. Not peaceful, profound. The kind of silence that made you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing. The kind that made you understand why humans had always feared the dark and told stories to fill it. I was eating dinner, freeze-dried beef stroganoff that tasted like salty cardboard, when I heard the first sound. A voice, distant but distinct, calling from somewhere in the woods. "Help, please, someone help me." I was on my feet immediately, abandoning the meal, grabbing my flashlight and radio. The voice came again, male. Desperate, echoing across the lake. "I'm hurt, please." I keyed the radio. "This is Ranger Reeves at Makwa Station. I've got a possible hiker in distress near the lake. Going to investigate." Static, then Vernon's voice, thick with something I couldn't identify. "Jacob, what exactly did you hear?" "Someone calling for help." Male voice, "Sounds like he's injured." A long pause, too long. "Jacob, listen to me carefully. Stay inside the cabin. Do not go out there. Do not respond to that voice." The hairs on my neck stood up. "What?" "Vernon, someone's hurt out there." "No one is hurt. No one is there. Lock your doors, close your shutters, stay inside until dawn. That is a direct order." The voice called again, closer now, right at the tree line. "Please, I can't make it much longer. I'm freezing." My hand hovered over the door handle. Every instinct screamed at me to help. That's what I was here for, to help people in trouble. "Jacob." Vernon's voice cracked through the radio. The previous ranger reported the same thing. "It's not human. Whatever you do, don't let it know you can hear it." I stepped back from the door. The voice called 3 more times over the next hour, each time from a different location. First near the lake, then behind the cabin, then up near the service road. Each time it sounded desperate, afraid, in pain. Each time I forced myself to stay inside, hands clenched, heart hammering. Around midnight, it stopped. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the fireplace, flashlight in one hand, the flare gun I'd found in the emergency kit in the other, and watched the windows. In the morning, I found tracks in the mud near the cabin's back door. Not boot prints. Not bear or elk or any animal I recognized. They were elongated, almost human, but too large, with too many joints in the toes. Whatever had made them had stood at the door for some time. The prints were deep, compressed into the soil with significant weight, and scratched into the door itself. 5 parallel gouges in the wood were marks that looked like they'd been made by something with very long fingers. I radioed Vernon at first light. "You made the right call," he said. "Now listen. What I'm about to tell you isn't in any manual, and the Park Service will deny it exists if you ever repeat it, but you need to know what you're dealing with out there." I waited, watching the tree line through the window. The Ojibwe have stories about a creature called the Wendigo, a person who committed the sin of cannibalism and was transformed into something else, something that's always hungry, always hunting. It's drawn to places of isolation, of desperation, and it's smart enough to mimic human voices, smart enough to exploit our instinct to help each other. You're telling me there's a Wendigo out here? I'm telling you there's something out here that's been witnessed by rangers and locals for the past 60 years. Something that takes people who wander too far from the trails. Something that the Park Service knows about but can't acknowledge, because how do you explain that to the public? I thought about the gaps in the previous ranger's log. What happened to the last ranger? Another long pause. He broke protocol. Went to investigate the voice. We found his cabin abandoned 3 days later. Found him 2 weeks after that, 7 miles deeper into the woods. What was left of him? My mouth went dry. "You follow the rules, you'll be fine," Vernon continued. "Don't go out after dark. Don't respond to voices you hear in the woods. Don't investigate abnormal animal behavior. And if you see something that looks human but moves wrong, walk away. Don't run. Don't engage. Just back away slowly and return to the cabin. And if I want to quit? Then you wait until the relief ranger arrives in 3 weeks and you never speak about why you're leaving. That's the deal." 3 weeks suddenly felt like a lifetime. The next 5 days passed in tense normalcy. I kept myself busy with routine tasks, clearing fallen branches from the trails, checking the condition of the backcountry campsites, updating the weather log. I saw plenty of wildlife: deer, a black bear preparing for hibernation, ravens that watched me with unsettling intelligence. But I didn't hear the voice again. I started to wonder if that first night had been some kind of hazing ritual, a story Vernon told to scare new rangers. But then I'd remember the tracks, the scratches on the door. I'd remember the genuine fear in Vernon's voice. On the 6th day, I met Marcus Wade. He came hiking up the main trail mid-morning, a tall man in his 50s with gray threaded through his black hair, and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He wore quality gear, but not new. The jacket and boots had miles on them. "You must be the new ranger," he said, extending a hand. "Marcus, I've got a cabin about 8 miles northwest of here, up near Akecha Ridge." We shook. His grip was firm, calloused. Jacob didn't realize there were private cabins this far out. Grandfathered in. My family's owned the land since before this was a national park. We're technically an in-holding, legally private property surrounded by federal land. He glanced at the lake. "Came by to introduce myself and give you fair warning." "About what?" "The winter. This is my 43rd season up here. I've seen things that would make your supervisors nervous." He studied me. "Vernon tell you about the woods yet?" He mentioned something that imitates voices. Marcus nodded slowly. "The Ojibwe call it Wendigo, but it's got names in a dozen languages. Algonquin, Cree, Innu. Every culture that lived in these northern forests knew about it, warned about it." He pulled a thermos from his pack, poured himself coffee. "Most people think it's just folklore, cautionary tales to keep children from wandering off. But the old stories exist for a reason." "You're saying it's real?" "I'm saying I've lived in these mountains for 4 decades, and I've learned to respect what I don't understand. The Ojibwe had rules about it. Never speak of it directly, especially in winter. Never acknowledge it if you hear it calling. Never let yourself get too hungry, too desperate. That's when it has power over you." He drank his coffee, eyes on the distant ridges. "My grandfather told me stories when I was young. He was Ojibwe, married into a white family, caught between 2 worlds. He said the Wendigo was hunger given form. Not just physical hunger, spiritual hunger. The hunger for things you can't have. The hunger that makes you hollow inside. It feeds on that emptiness, makes it grow." "Did he ever see one?" "He said he heard one once, during a bad winter in the 20s. Heard it calling in his brother's voice for 3 nights straight. His brother had died 2 months before in a logging accident. The thing knew somehow. Knew exactly how to hurt him." Marcus poured the rest of his coffee on the ground. "On the 3rd night, my grandfather almost went to it. Almost. Said if his wife hadn't stopped him, he would have walked right into those woods and never come back." A cold wind moved through the pines, setting them swaying. Why are you telling me this, I asked. Because you're alone out here. Because winter's coming. And the darkness lasts longer than you think. Because I saw what happened to Mitchell the ranger before you. His expression darkened. Good man. Smart. But he didn't believe. Thought it was all superstition. When he heard the voice, he convinced himself it was a hiker in genuine trouble. He went looking. Vernon said they found him. Parts of him. Scattered across a quarter-mile of forest. The autopsy said animal attack, probably a bear. But bears don't arrange bones in patterns. Don't leave markers. He met my eyes. Don't leave warnings. I felt the temperature drop, though the sun hadn't moved. If you hear your name in the dark, Marcus said quietly, don't answer. If you see lights moving through the trees where no trails exist, don't follow them. If the animals start behaving strangely, standing in groups, watching the cabin, making sounds they shouldn't make, radio me immediately. He handed me a card with a frequency written on it. My radio. I monitor it constantly during winter. Why do you stay, if it's so dangerous? He smiled, but there was sadness in it. This is my home. My family's home. You don't abandon home just because it's haunted. You learn to live with what haunts it. You respect it. You survive. After Marcus left, I spent the afternoon chopping wood, trying to process the conversation. Part of me still wanted to dismiss it as folklore, as isolation playing tricks on people's minds, but another part, the part that had felt those scratches in the door, that had heard the desperation in Vernon's voice, knew better. As the sun set, painting the lake in shades of orange and red, I secured the cabin, checked the locks twice, loaded the shotgun I'd found in the storage locker, set my flashlight, radio and flare gun within easy reach. Then I waited. The voice came at 9:47 p.m. But this time, it wasn't calling for help. This time, it was calling my name. Jacob. Soft, almost tentative, like someone trying not to wake me. Jacob, are you there? I froze in the chair, every muscle rigid. Jacob, it's Sarah. My ex-wife's name. The voice even sounded like her. The slight rasp she got when she was tired, the way she drew out the second syllable of my name. Jacob. I made a mistake. Leaving you was a mistake. I'm here. I came to find you. Please, I'm so cold. Can you let me in? My hand moved toward the door before I could stop it. I forced it back, gripping the armrest until my knuckles went white. I drove all the way from Seattle. The car broke down on the service road. Please, Jacob. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Just open the door. We can fix this. We can fix everything. Tears burned in my eyes. Because part of me, a desperate, lonely part, wanted it to be real. Wanted Sarah to be standing outside in the cold, wanting me back, ready to make things right. I'm freezing, Jacob. Please don't let me die out here. The voice broke on the last word, cracking with emotion that sounded so genuine, so real that I almost believed it. Almost. I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. Marcus, are you there? Static. Then, I'm here. You hearing it? Yes. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge it. It's testing you. Jacob. The voice outside grew frustrated. Why won't you answer me? What did I do? Please, I'm scared. It knows things, I whispered into the radio. Personal things. How? They say it can reach into your mind, find what hurts, find what you want most. Marcus's voice was steady, calm, but it can only use what you give it. Don't give it anything. The voice changed, became angry. You always were selfish, always thinking about yourself. That's why I left, Jacob. That's why everyone leaves you eventually. You're not worth saving. I closed my eyes, forced myself to breathe. I see you in there, the voice said, and now it sounded less like Sarah and more like something trying to imitate her, the mask slipping, sitting in your chair like a coward, afraid of me. You should be afraid. You should. The sentence ended in a sound that wasn't human. A clicking, rasping noise like branches scraping together or bones settling in a pile. Then silence. I kept the lights on all night, kept the radio close, kept myself awake through sheer force of will, knowing that if I slept I might dream, and in dreams, maybe the thing outside could reach deeper. At dawn, I found new tracks. These ones circled the entire cabin, round and round, like something had been pacing, studying, planning. And on the window where I'd been sitting, pressed against the glass from outside, was a handprint. Too large to be human, with fingers that were far too long. The days that followed established a grim routine. Sunlight meant relative safety. I could perform my duties, maintain the trails, check on the few backcountry sites that remained accessible as snow began to accumulate. But as the sun dipped below the ridgeline each afternoon, a knot of dread would form in my stomach. Because every night it came back. Sometimes it used Sarah's voice. Sometimes my mother's, who had died when I was 17. Once, horrifyingly, it used my own voice, calling to me from outside as if there were two of me and one was locked out, desperate to come in from the cold. That's the worst, Marcus told me during one of our radio check-ins. When it uses your own voice, makes you wonder which one is real, the one inside or the one outside. I'd started keeping detailed notes documenting each encounter, the times, the voices used, the duration. Some scientific part of my mind thought that if I treated this like a behavioral study, it would make it less terrifying. It didn't. But patterns emerged. The thing I couldn't bring myself to use the name, as if speaking it would give it more power, seemed strongest between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. Its visits were growing longer, more persistent, and the voices were becoming more sophisticated, more emotionally manipulative. On the 10th night, it tried a new approach. I was reviewing maps by lamplight when I heard children singing, multiple voices, young, harmonizing in a song I didn't recognize. The melody was beautiful and sad, echoing across the frozen lake. My blood turned to ice water. I'd made the mistake of mentioning to Vernon during a radio check that Sarah and I had been trying for a child before the marriage collapsed, that the inability to conceive had been one of the fractures that eventually shattered us. Jacob, a child's voice called, light and innocent. Daddy, why won't you come play with us?
We're cold, Daddy.
We're scared. Please help us. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices seemed to come from inside my head as much as outside. Marcus, I gasped into the radio. It's using children, multiple voices. Jesus. Marcus caught himself. Okay. Listen to me. This is escalation. It's trying harder because you've been resisting. You need to make noise. Combat the silence. Put on music. Anything. Loud. Give yourself something else to focus on. I fumbled for my phone, connected it to the portable speaker I'd brought. Put on the first playlist I could find, classic rock, loud and discordant. The children's voices continued underneath, but at least now I had something to anchor to. Why won't you save us, Daddy? Are we not good enough? Don't you want us? I turned the volume higher, until the cabin vibrated with sound, focused on the music, on the familiar chord progressions, on anything except the small pleading voices outside. At 3:15 a.m., they stopped. But in the sudden silence after I turned off the music, I heard something else. Not voices this time. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, walking around the cabin in a slow circuit. Then scratching, not on the door, on the roof. Something was on top of the cabin. I grabbed the flashlight, tilted it upward. Through the skylight in the A-frame's peak, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something large, impossibly tall, moving across the roof with a grace that defied its size. The scratching continued, methodical, like it was testing the structure, looking for weaknesses. Marcus, it's on the roof. Stay calm. The cabin's solid. It can't get in unless you let it. Unless I let it, what does that mean? It needs permission. Invitation. That's part of the lore. It can't cross certain thresholds unless you acknowledge it, respond to it, give it some form of consent. As long as you stay silent, stay inside, you're protected. The scratching stopped. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a low resonant call that seemed to vibrate in my chest. Not quite a howl, not quite words, but something in between. A sound of hunger and loneliness and rage so old it predated language. After that night, I started rationing my supplies more carefully. Not because I was running low, Vernon had stocked the cabin well, but because I'd started to understand something. Hunger. That's what Marcus had said. The thing was drawn to hunger, fed on it, embodied it. I couldn't afford to be hungry, couldn't afford to be desperate, couldn't afford to want anything badly enough that it could use that want against me. So I ate regularly, kept myself fed and warm and as mentally stable as possible. I established strict routines: wake at sunrise, breakfast, morning rounds, lunch, afternoon maintenance, dinner before dark, evening inside with lights and sound. Structure against chaos, order against the void. On the 14th day, I had my first daytime encounter. I was hiking the northern trail, checking for winter damage, when I found the elk. 7 of them standing in a clearing, completely motionless, not grazing, not moving. Just standing. Their eyes were open but unfocused. Their breath formed clouds in the cold air, proof they were alive, but otherwise they might have been statues. I remembered the previous ranger's log entry. Non-responsive to approach. I should have left immediately, should have backed away and radioed it in, but scientific curiosity got the better of me. I moved closer, studying them. Their eyes were wrong. The pupils were too dilated, the gaze too fixed. One of them had frost forming on its muzzle. It had been standing here long enough for its breath to freeze. Hello, I said softly, irrationally hoping for some response. The nearest elk's head turned. Not the smooth, alert movement of a healthy animal, jerky, mechanical, like something was puppeteering it. Its eyes focused on me. And it smiled. I'm not speaking metaphorically. The elk's mouth pulled back in an expression no animal should be capable of making, revealing teeth and gums in a horrible parody of a human smile. Then all 7 elk turned their heads in unison, all of them smiling. I ran. Crashed through the underbrush, not caring about the noise, the trail forgotten, ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed, until I burst out onto the service road and could see the cabin in the distance. Only when I was inside, door locked, did I grab the radio. Marcus, the elk, the ones behaving strangely. I saw them. Did they approach you? No. They just looked at me. But it was wrong. All wrong. They were smiling, Marcus. How can an elk smile? It's using them, he said quietly. Puppeting them somehow. The Ojibwe stories mention it. The Wendigo can inhabit animals, make them extensions of itself, scout for prey. The animals always die afterward. Their bodies can't sustain whatever it puts inside them. This is insane. This can't be real. There has to be a rational explanation. Disease, parasites, environmental contamination. Jacob. His voice cut through my panic. I know you want logic. I know you want science. But some things exist outside those frameworks. Accept that, or you'll drive yourself mad trying to rationalize the irrational. That night, I didn't hear voices. Instead, I heard breathing. Heavy, labored breathing right outside the door. For hours. Just breathing, slow and steady, and patient, like something waiting for me to break, waiting for me to open the door just to make it stop. I didn't break. But I came close. By the 3rd week, I'd stopped sleeping through the night. Cat naps during daylight hours, never more than an hour at a time. The exhaustion was becoming a problem. I'd catch myself zoning out during routine tasks, losing track of time, seeing movement in my peripheral vision that vanished when I looked directly at it. The isolation was grinding me down in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd thought I wanted solitude, thought I needed escape from the noise and complication of normal life. But this wasn't solitude, this was siege. I was trapped in a 40 by 30-foot cabin with something outside that wanted in, and the psychological toll was mounting. You're halfway through, Marcus reminded me during one of our evening check-ins. Vernon's already dispatched your relief. Another week and a half, you're done, you can make it. Could I, though? The thing outside was growing bolder, more creative, learning. 3 days earlier, it had somehow accessed my personnel file, called out my social security number, my mother's maiden name, my address in Seattle. Information it shouldn't have been able to know. Information that suggested it could reach beyond this forest, beyond the immediate sphere of my thoughts. 2 days earlier, it had mimicked Vernon's voice, calling on the radio, telling me there was an emergency evacuation. I needed to head to the service road immediately. I'd almost believed it, almost responded. But there'd been something off about the cadence, a slight wrongness in the phrasing. When I'd checked the official radio frequency, real Vernon had confirmed he'd sent no such message. It's getting desperate, Marcus had said. That's good and bad. Good because it means your resistance is working. Bad because desperate things take risks. Yesterday, it had tried silence. No voices, no scratching, no breathing. Just absolute profound silence that felt like pressure against my eardrums. Silence that made me question whether anything was out there at all, whether I'd imagined the whole thing, whether I'd gone mad from isolation and there had never been any creature, just my own deteriorating mind. That silence was almost worse than the sounds. Almost. On day 19, Marcus hiked down to check on me in person. He arrived mid-morning, and I'd never been so grateful to see another human being. We sat on the porch, first time I'd been outside after dark in weeks, and drank coffee in the pale sunlight. You look rough, he said bluntly. Feel rough. I wrapped my hands around the mug, absorbing its warmth. Getting hard to separate what's real from what's not. Yesterday I could have sworn I saw footprints leading away from the cabin, heading toward the lake. But when I checked, there was nothing. Just snow. Your mind's under assault. That's the point. It's trying to soften you up, make you doubt yourself, make you vulnerable. He studied the tree line. My grandfather used to say the Wendigo was loneliness given teeth, that it hunted people who'd separated themselves from the tribe, from community, people who thought they could survive alone. Is that why it's here? Because of me? Maybe. Or maybe it's always been here and you're just the latest person to wander into its territory. He poured more coffee. The important thing is you're still fighting, still holding the line. What happened to the people who didn't, besides Mitchell? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. There's a reason this position has high turnover. 7 rangers in the past 12 years. 3 of them completed their terms. 3 abandoned their posts and refused to speak about why. Mitchell was the 7th. And no one's done anything. The Park Service just keeps sending people out here. What would you have them do? Close the entire northern section of the park? Explain to Congress and the public that they're ceding territory to a creature from indigenous folklore? The Park Service's official position is that this area is remote and psychologically challenging. They provide extra mental health resources, shorter duty rotations. They look for rangers with experience in isolation, but they can't acknowledge what's really out here. It's wrong, sending people out here without telling them the truth. Vernon told you, I told you, and you stayed. Sometimes people need to see it to believe it, need to feel the fear firsthand. He met my eyes. Question is, what are you going to do with this experience when you leave? I don't know, part of me wants to expose it, write about it, make sure people know. And they'll call you crazy. Damaged by isolation. The Park Service will bury your testimony under piles of psychiatric evaluations and non-disclosure agreements. Marcus stood, walked to the porch railing. Or you can do what I do, live with the knowledge, respect what you don't understand. Protect the people who come after you, quietly, without fanfare. That evening, after Marcus left, I made a decision. I started writing everything down, not just notes for my own reference, but a detailed account. Every encounter, every voice, every manifestation. If something happened to me, if the thing outside finally found a way in, at least there would be a record. At least someone would know the truth. The sun set, the temperature dropped. I secured the cabin and prepared for another night. But this time, when the voice came, it was different. Jacob, my own voice, speaking from right outside the door. I know you're tired, I know you're scared, but you don't have to be. Let me in, let us be whole again. I didn't respond. I'm the parts of you that you left outside. The anger, the grief, the loneliness. You can't keep me out forever. I'm already inside. I've always been inside. The door handle rattled. Once, twice. You wanted to disappear. That's why you came here. You wanted to stop existing. I can help with that. I can make the pain stop. All you have to do is open the door. My hand moved toward the handle. Not consciously. My body acting on some deep, exhausted impulse toward surrender. That's it. My voice crooned from outside. You're so tired. Rest. Let go. Let me in. The radio crackled. Marcus's voice. Jacob, answer me. Right now. I jerked back from the door, grabbing the radio. Here. I'm here. I heard it on the emergency frequency. It's broadcasting now. Trying to isolate you. His voice was urgent. Listen to me. That thing outside isn't you. Isn't any part of you. It's wearing your voice like a mask. Don't believe anything it says. It knew, I whispered. It knew I came here to disappear. We all know that. Anyone who takes a job this isolated is running from something. But running and giving up aren't the same thing. You're still here, still fighting. That matters. The voice outside grew frustrated. Marcus can't help you. He's just another old man telling stories. But I'm real. I'm right here. And I'm so hungry, Jacob. So hungry. Let me in, feed me. The mask was fully off now. The voice was still mine, but the words were wrong. The intonation inhuman. 1 week, Marcus said. 7 more days. You can survive anything for 7 days. The thing outside began to scream. Not words, just rage and hunger and frustration. A sound that made the windows rattle and sent animals fleeing through the forest. The scream went on, rising and falling, until finally, mercifully, it stopped. Dawn came eventually. It always did. But I knew the worst was still to come. The final week crawled by like years. Time became elastic, unreliable. I'd check my watch and find hours had passed in what felt like minutes. Or I'd sit through what seemed like an endless night only to discover 15 minutes had elapsed. The thing outside was changing tactics daily. Now, probing, testing, looking for any weakness in my defenses. On day 22, it tried bargaining. Offered me things in my father's voice. A father I'd never known, who'd left when I was 2. Promised me reunion, answers, closure. All I had to do was step outside. Just for a moment. Just to talk. On day 23, it tried threats. Promised it would follow me when I left. Find me in Seattle. Hunt me through the streets until there was nowhere left to hide. The threats were so detailed, so specific, that I spent hours convinced it could actually do it, that leaving wouldn't save me, that I'd brought something back with me that would never let go. On day 24, Marcus hiked down again. This time he brought supplies, fresh food, batteries, a bottle of whiskey. You look like death, he said, setting the pack on the table. Feel like it. I hadn't shaved in days, hadn't showered. The cabin smelled like unwashed human and wood smoke and fear. 3 more days, just 3 more days. The relief ranger is already en route, Vernon confirmed it this morning. You're almost out. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed me one. But I need to tell you something about the transition. I drank the whiskey. It burned going down, but the burn felt real, grounding. What about it? The next ranger coming in is named Derek Voss. Former Marine, experienced in wilderness survival. Vernon specifically chose him because of his psychological profile. Steady, skeptical, not prone to panic. Marcus refilled my glass. But he doesn't know, not really. Vernon's going to brief him the same way he briefed you. Vague warnings, suggestions to stay inside after dark. But he won't believe it, not until he experiences it. So this just continues, forever. An endless rotation of people being traumatized out here. Unless someone finds a way to stop it. Marcus's expression was grim. My grandfather's people had rituals, ways to appease it, ward it off, maybe even destroy it. But that knowledge was lost, suppressed, stolen by boarding schools and missionaries who thought they were saving souls by erasing culture. There has to be something we can do. There is. Survive, bear witness, pass on the knowledge to the next person. That's all we can do. He stood, walked to the window. The Ojibwe believe that monsters exist because they serve a purpose. They teach us about ourselves, about our weaknesses and fears, about what we're capable of when pushed to our limits. What's this one teaching us? That isolation is dangerous, that we need each other to stay human, that the hunger inside us for connection, for meaning, for something to fill the emptiness can destroy us if we let it. He turned back to me. You came here to escape, but what this thing has shown you is that you can't escape yourself. You can only face what you're running from, and decide if you're going to let it consume you. That night, day 25, the thing outside tried one final approach. It didn't use voices, didn't scratch or breathe or make threats. Instead, it showed me myself. Through the window, illuminated by starlight, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. My exact height, my build, wearing the same clothes I'd worn when I'd first arrived at the cabin 3 weeks earlier. The figure looked directly at me, raised one hand in greeting. Then it turned and walked into the forest. Every instinct screamed at me to follow, to understand what I was seeing, to confront this impossible mirror. I grabbed the radio. Marcus? I see it, he said. I hadn't told him what was happening, but somehow he knew. Don't follow it. It's showing you the path, the easy path, the one where you give up and walk away from yourself. I don't understand. It's offering you dissolution, an end to the struggle of being Jacob Reeves. You can follow that figure into the woods and never have to be you again. Never have to carry the pain or the fear or the complicated mess of being human. You can just stop. The figure stood at the tree line, waiting, patient. But that's not escape, Marcus continued. That's extinction. And whatever's left after you follow it into those trees won't be you anymore. It'll be another puppet, another mask it can wear. I closed my eyes, turned away from the window. 3 days, Marcus said. Hold on for 3 more days. The figure waited outside until dawn. I never looked at it again. Day 26 passed in a blur of exhaustion and preparation. I packed my gear, organized my notes, cleaned the cabin, tried to leave it better than I'd found it for Derek Voss, whoever he was, hoped he'd be stronger than me, hoped he'd survive his rotation. Day 27, Vernon radioed to confirm Derek would arrive the next morning. You've done good work, Jacob. Better than expected. The reports you've filed have been exemplary. I almost laughed. The official reports I'd submitted were sanitized versions of the truth. Wildlife observations, weather data, maintenance logs. Nothing about voices in the dark or puppeteered elk or things that wore human faces like masks. That final night, day 28, the thing outside was silent. No voices, no scratching, no sounds at all. Just the certainty that it was out there, watching, waiting. At 3 a.m., something slid under the door. A piece of paper folded once. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up, unfolded it with shaking hands. Written in perfect handwriting that looked exactly like my own. Thank you for the meal. I'll see you again. I burned the note in the fireplace, watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash. Derek Voss arrived at 10 a.m. He was exactly as Marcus had described. Fit, composed, carrying himself with military precision. We did the official handoff, going through inventory and procedures. Vernon participated via radio, keeping everything professional and by the book. Any issues I should be aware of? Derek asked. I looked at him, thought about everything I'd experienced, everything I'd learned, the warnings I could give. Stay inside after dark, I said. Don't respond to voices you hear in the woods. Trust your instincts. He nodded, clearly not understanding but filing the information away. He would, soon enough. Marcus met me at the trailhead with his truck, drove me the 40 miles to the nearest town in silence. Finally, as we pulled up to the bus station, he spoke. What will you do now? Go back to Seattle. Figure out what normal looks like again. I looked at him. Will I ever be normal again? Define normal. You've seen something most people never see. Survived something most people couldn't survive. That changes you, but change isn't always bad. He handed me a card with his phone number. If you need to talk, if the memories get too heavy, call me. I took the card. Thank you for everything. Thank you for lasting the full rotation. A lot of people don't. He hesitated. One more thing, that note it left you. The thing about seeing you again. Yeah. It was probably bluffing. These entities tend to be territorial, bound to specific locations, but he met my eyes. Stay connected to people. Don't isolate yourself. Don't let the hunger in. The bus arrived. I climbed aboard, found a seat, watched Montana scroll past the window. That was 6 months ago. I'm back in Seattle now. Got a job with the city parks department, still working with nature but in a much more controlled environment. I see a therapist twice a week. We don't talk about what really happened at Macwa Lake. She thinks I had a mental health crisis brought on by isolation. Maybe she's right. Maybe it was all in my head. Except, sometimes, late at night I hear scratching on my apartment door. Just for a moment. Just enough to remind me. And twice now. I've seen someone at the edge of my vision who looks exactly like me. Standing on street corners, watching from windows. Always at a distance. Always just out of focus. I checked with Vernon last month. Derek Voss completed his rotation. Submitted similar reports to mine. Exemplary observations. Nothing unusual. He's requested assignment to a different area. Vernon didn't elaborate. The position at Macwa Lake is open again. They're already interviewing candidates. I think about calling. Warning whoever takes the job next. But what would I say that Vernon and Marcus won't already tell them? What words would make them understand something they need to experience to believe? So I keep my story to myself. Write it down sometimes, like I'm doing now. Try to make sense of what happened. Try to figure out what that thing in the woods really was. Ancient predator, manifestation of collective fear, or just the darkness inside all of us given form and hunger. Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that I survived. That I'm still here, still fighting, still choosing every day to be human despite how much easier it would be to just stop. The hunger is always there. The emptiness. The call of dissolution. But I don't answer. Not anymore. Though sometimes, in the quietest hours before dawn, I wonder if the thing in the woods was right about one thing. Maybe I did let it in. Maybe we all do, eventually. And maybe the real test isn't whether we can keep the monsters outside, it's whether we can live with the ones we carry within. I still have Marcus's card, haven't called yet, but I keep it close. Just in case. The transfer papers sat on my desk like a death warrant. After 15 years working the tourist-friendly trails of Yellowstone, I was being reassigned to Devil's Backbone National Forest in northern Michigan. Nobody wanted this post. Rangers who worked there either requested transfers within months or simply disappeared into the 847,000 acres of dense wilderness. My name is Marcus Reed, and I should have listened to the warnings. The drive from Wyoming took 3 days. As I crossed into Michigan, the landscape transformed from open plains to suffocating walls of pine and oak. Devil's Backbone wasn't on most maps. The Forest Service preferred it that way. Located along the Canadian border, it served as a buffer zone between civilization and something the government didn't want to acknowledge. Station Chief Harrison met me at the ranger station, a fortified compound that looked more like a military outpost than a park facility. Steel shutters covered every window. The doors were reinforced with iron bars. A 10-foot fence topped with razor wire surrounded the perimeter. "Reed," Harrison grunted, his weathered face mapping 50 years of wilderness service. "You read the briefing packet?" "Yes, sir," though it was mostly redacted. "The redacted parts are what'll kill you." He led me inside, past walls lined with missing person reports. Dozens of faces stared back. Hikers, hunters, even seasoned rangers. First rule, never patrol alone after dark. Second rule, if you hear someone calling your name from the woods, don't answer. Third rule, some things out there look human but aren't. The station housed 12 rangers, though only 8 bunks were occupied. Harrison introduced me to the crew. Ezra Thompson, a barrel-chested veteran with nervous eyes. Gabriel Chen, who kept touching the crucifix around his neck. and Carter Rodriguez, the youngest at 25, who flinched at every sound. "Where are the others?" I asked, noting the empty bunks. "Jeremiah vanished 2 months ago," Harrison said. "Vincent quit last week, packed up in the middle of the night and drove straight through to Florida, won't answer our calls." That first night, I lay in my bunk listening to the forest. Unlike Yellowstone's natural symphony, Devil's Backbone was silent. No owls, no coyotes, no insects. Just an oppressive quiet that made my ears ring. Around midnight, something howled in the distance. Not a wolf. I knew wolf calls. This sound was deeper, more guttural, almost human in its suffering. The other rangers shifted in their bunks, but nobody spoke. We all lay there, pretending to sleep, as the howl echoed through the darkness. The next morning, Harrison assigned me to the eastern sector with Ezra. We loaded the truck with standard gear plus items that weren't in any Forest Service manual. Silver-loaded ammunition, industrial-strength bear spray, and emergency flares that burned at 3,000 degrees. "Questions?" Harrison asked.
Why silver bullets?
"Because sometimes regular ones don't work." The eastern sector covered 200 square miles of virgin forest. Ancient trees formed a canopy so thick that noon felt like twilight. We drove the main fire road, checking trail markers and campsite registers. Every few miles, Ezra would stop and examine the tree line with binoculars. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Signs," he said cryptically. "Broken branches at 7 feet or higher. Claw marks that don't match any known animal. Tracks that, well, you'll know them when you see them." At mile marker 47, we found our first problem. A campsite had been destroyed. Not vandalized, destroyed. The tent was shredded into ribbons. Sleeping bags were scattered across 50 yards, torn apart with surgical precision. Blood stained the ground, but there were no bodies. Ezra radioed it in while I photographed the scene. That's when I noticed the tracks. They started human bare footprints in the soft earth, but as they led away from the campsite, they changed. The toes elongated, the heels stretched. By the time they reached the tree line, they were something else entirely, something with claws. "Dogman," Ezra whispered, following my gaze. "Third attack this month." "Dogman." Local name for it, been here longer than the park. The Ojibwe called it Wendigo Makanak, the cannibal beast. Looks like a man until it doesn't. Then it's 7 feet of muscle, fangs, and hunger. We spent 3 hours processing the scene. No identification in the destroyed camp. No vehicles at the trailhead. Like the campers had simply materialized here to die. As we worked, I felt watched. The forest pressed in, branches reaching like grasping fingers. "We need to go," Ezra announced suddenly, though it was only mid-afternoon. "Now." I didn't argue. The feeling of being stalked intensified with each passing minute. We packed quickly, but professionally. Harrison had warned about panicking in the field. As we drove away, I glanced in the side mirror. Something stood at the campsite. Tall, bipedal, covered in dark fur. It watched our retreat with eyes that glowed amber in the shadows. Then it dropped to all fours and melted back into the forest with impossible grace. "You saw it," Ezra said. "It wasn't a question. What do we do?" "We report it. We log it. We warn people away from Sector 7. And we pray it stays territorial." That night, Harrison debriefed us in his office. The walls were covered with maps, each marked with colored pins. Red for confirmed deaths, yellow for disappearances, blue for sightings. The eastern sector was a constellation of pins. "It's getting bolder," Harrison said. 20 years ago, we'd get 1 attack per season. Now it's weekly. Something's stirring them up. "Thumkar?" I asked. "You think there's just one?" "Read. This forest is 847,000 acres of the oldest land in North America. Things live here that predate human memory. The Dogman is just what we call the one that looks most like us." He pulled out a file stamped classified. Inside were photographs spanning decades, blurry shapes in the darkness, massive footprints next to measuring tapes, and bodies always partially eaten, always arranged in ritualistic patterns. "The government knows," Harrison continued, "has since the 50s. But what are they supposed to do? Evacuate 3 states because monsters are real? So they contain it. That's our real job. Not protecting the forest, protecting people from what's in it." Over the following weeks, I learned the rhythm of Devil's Backbone. Patrol in pairs. Trust your instincts. When the birds go quiet, leave immediately. Mark territories with spray paint. The creatures respected boundaries, mostly, and never ever investigate screams after dark. But the Dogman grew bolder. We found tracks closer to the station. Trail cameras captured glimpses, a shape too large to be human, too upright to be a bear. Hikers reported being followed by something that walked on 2 legs but ran on 4. Then Caleb Morrison arrived. Morrison was a cryptozoologist from Detroit, armed with expensive equipment and dangerous enthusiasm. He'd bribed someone at headquarters for a research permit. Harrison tried to refuse him entry, but Morrison had connections. "I'm here to prove they exist," Morrison announced, unpacking thermal cameras and sound equipment. "The Michigan Dogman. I've tracked sightings for 15 years. This is the epicenter." "Mr. Morrison," Harrison said carefully, "this forest has rules. Break them and you'll join the missing person board." Morrison laughed. "I've researched every disappearance. Pattern analysis suggests territorial behavior. Stay out of marked zones, and you're fine." "The zones change," Ezra warned. "What was safe yesterday might not be tomorrow." But Morrison wouldn't listen. He set up base camp in Sector 5, installing motion sensors and bait stations. We were ordered to check on him daily, though Harrison made it clear we weren't to risk ourselves for his stupidity. For a week, Morrison's updates were disappointing. Sensor malfunctions, bait untouched. He grew frustrated, venturing deeper into restricted areas. His camp moved daily, chasing shadows and local legends. On the 8th night, his emergency beacon activated. Protocol demanded a response, but it was 2 a.m. The beacon's location showed Sector 7, the Dogman's current territory. Harrison assembled a team himself, Ezra, Gabriel, and me. We armed ourselves with rifles, flares, and prayers. The forest at night was a living thing. Our headlights carved tunnels through the darkness, but the shadows pressed back, hungry and patient. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. Even our truck engines seemed muffled by the oppressive silence. We found Morrison's camp 2 miles from the main road, or what remained of it. Equipment lay scattered like technological entrails. His tent was inside out, sleeping bag hanging from a tree branch 30 feet up. Blood painted the clearing in arterial sprays. But no body. "Spread out," Harrison ordered. "Stay in sight, look for a trail." I swept my flashlight across the carnage, documenting everything. The attack pattern was different from the campsite Ezra and I had found. This was rage, not hunger. The Dogman had taken offense. Gabriel found the tracks leading north. Human footprints. Morrison running barefoot in panic. Behind them, the pursuers' tracks. They started as the elongated near-human prints I'd seen before, but quickly transitioned to something else. The stride length increased to 15 feet. Claw marks gouged the earth. We followed for a quarter mile before Harrison called halt. The tracks led into a ravine system we called the Devil's Throat, a network of caves and crevices that honeycombed the eastern ridge. Even in daylight, rangers avoided it. "He's gone," Harrison declared. "We document and withdraw." "We can't leave him," I protested. "He's dead, Reed, and if we follow, we will be too." As if in response, a howl erupted from the ravine. Close. Too close. It started low, almost human, then climbed to frequencies that made my teeth ache. Other howls answered from different directions. We ran. Training and dignity abandoned, we sprinted for the truck as the forest exploded with movement. Branches snapped. Something large paralleled our flight, herding us like sheep. Gabriel fired warning shots that were swallowed by the darkness. I reached the truck first, yanking the door open. As the others piled in, I saw it, illuminated by our vehicle's dome light. The Dogman stood at the clearing's edge, 7 feet tall, covered in coarse brown fur, with the basic shape of a man, but wrong in every detail. Its legs bent backward at the knee, arms hung past its thighs, ending in hands tipped with black claws. The face was the worst, almost human, but stretched into a canine muzzle, filled with teeth designed for rending. Our eyes met. In that moment, I saw intelligence. Not animal cunning, but genuine sapience. It knew what we were, it knew what it was, and it knew we didn't belong here. Harrison gunned the engine, tires spinning on loose earth. The Dogman didn't pursue. It stood there watching, until the forest swallowed it again. Nobody spoke during the drive back. At the station, Harrison filed the report. Morrison, Caleb, missing, presumed dead, cause, animal attack. The same lie told 100 times before. That was my introduction to Devil's Backbone. Over the coming months, I would learn that the Dogman was just one resident of our nightmare forest. Ancient things walked these woods, things that predated European settlement, predated the native tribes, perhaps predated humanity itself. But first I had to survive my encounter with something even the Dogman feared. Something that left tracks the size of dinner plates and stood 15 feet tall. The locals called it Bigfoot. The rangers called it death-walking. 3 months into my assignment at Devil's Backbone, I thought I'd adapted. The Dogman attacks continued, but we'd learned its patterns. Stay out of Sector 7 after dark. Don't investigate fresh kills alone. When you heard its hunting howl, evacuate immediately. We lost hikers, maybe one every few weeks, but the rangers stayed alive. Then Anthony Briggs arrived with news that changed everything. Briggs was a timber surveyor from the state, sent to assess lumber values in Sector 9. He stumbled into our station at dawn, clothes torn, eyes wild with terror. His partner Nicholas Kane was missing. "Slow down," Harrison said, pouring coffee with hands that never shook anymore. "Start from the beginning." Briggs gulped the hot liquid, wincing. "We were marking trees near Copper Creek. Standard survey. Then we found structures." "Structures?" I asked. "Tree breaks, dozens of them. 20 feet up, trunks snapped like pencils, and formations, branches woven together in patterns. Shelters, maybe, or warnings." Ezra and I exchanged glances. We'd found similar sites but never reported them. Some things were too strange, even for our classified files. "We should have left," Briggs continued, "but Nicholas wanted photographs. Said it was evidence of illegal logging." He went closer to measure the breaks. His voice cracked. That's when the smell hit, like rotting meat mixed with wet dog and sulfur. Then we heard breathing, deep, rhythmic, something big watching us. "Did you see it?" Harrison asked. Briggs nodded, tears streaming. 15 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair. It stood behind a pine, just watching. When Nicholas raised his camera, it moved. Fast, so fast. 1 second Nicholas was there, the next he was gone, just gone. It took him into the canopy and vanished. Sector 9 was 40 miles north of the Dogmen's territory, dense with old-growth forest that had never seen a chainsaw. If something that size lived there, it had remained hidden for centuries, until now. Harrison assembled a search team. Himself, me, Gabriel, and 2 senior rangers, Thomas Wolfe and Dylan Cross. We loaded heavy weapons, satellite phones, and emergency beacons. As we prepared, Harrison pulled me aside. "What Briggs described, we've had reports for decades. The Ojibwe call it Wendigo. Settlers called it Sasquatch. We just call it the Giant. It's mostly peaceful, avoids humans, keeps to deep forest. But if it took someone, it's defending territory." Or something changed. The Dogman's aggression, the giant breaking pattern, something stirring them up, making them desperate. We reached Sector 9 by noon. Briggs guided us to the survey site, though he refused to leave the truck. Can't say I blamed him. The forest here was primordial. Trees older than the United States formed a cathedral of wood and shadow. Moss muffled our footsteps. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Just the whisper of wind through branches that had never known human touch. The tree breaks were exactly as Briggs described. Massive pines snapped at 20-foot heights, twisted by impossible strength. Some were woven into crude structures, not shelters but markers. Territory signs readable only to creatures that stood tall enough to see them. "Spread out," Harrison ordered. "Look for blood, clothing, anything." I partnered with Gabriel, moving north from the initial site. The forest floor was soft with centuries of decomposition, clearly showing tracks. And what tracks they were. Human-shaped but massive, 18 inches long, 8 inches wide. The stride length suggested something, walking upright, with legs longer than any human's. "Mary, Mother of God," Gabriel whispered, crossing himself. "It's real." We followed the tracks deeper into Sector 9. They led to a clearing, where the smell hit us, exactly as Briggs described. Rotting meat, wet dog, sulfur. My eyes watered. Gabriel gagged. In the clearing's center lay Nicholas Kane. He was alive but catatonic, curled in a fetal position. His clothes were intact, no visible injuries, but his hair had turned white. His eyes stared at nothing, pupils dilated to black pools. "Nicholas," I knelt beside him. "Can you hear me?" He didn't respond, didn't blink. His pulse raced like a hummingbird's. When I touched his shoulder, he screamed, a sound that sent every bird in a mile radius into flight, then back to catatonia. "We need medical evacuation," I radioed Harrison. "Subject is alive but non-responsive. Possible severe psychological trauma." "Copy. Sending coordinates to." The radio died. Not static, not interference, dead. Like someone had yanked out the battery. I checked full charge, green lights, but no signal. That's when we smelled it again. Stronger, closer. Gabriel raised his rifle, scanning the tree line. I pulled Nicholas to his feet, supporting his dead weight. We needed to move, now. The breathing started. Deep, rhythmic, like Briggs described, but somehow worse in person. It came from everywhere and nowhere. The forest itself seemed to inhale and exhale around us. Then we saw it. 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a massive oak, something watched us. The size was incomprehensible. My brain struggled to process a living thing that tall. Reddish-brown hair covered a body proportioned like a human, but built on an impossible scale. Arms thick as tree trunks, a chest that could house a car engine. But the face was the true horror. Almost human, but not brow ridge heavy enough to cast the eyes in permanent shadow. Nose flat, nostrils flared, mouth wider than any person's, lips pulled back to reveal teeth designed for omnivorous destruction. The eyes were worst. Brown, intelligent, ancient. They held knowledge of centuries spent watching humanity encroach on sacred spaces. They held patience worn thin. Gabriel fired. The bullet struck the oak beside its head, spraying bark. The giant didn't flinch. Instead, it stepped fully into view. 15 feet of primate power moving with shocking grace. It could have charged, could have killed us without effort. Instead, it spoke. Not words, not language, but a vocalization that conveyed meaning directly to the primitive parts of our brains. Leave, now, never return. We ran. I half carried, half dragged Nicholas while Gabriel covered our retreat. The giant didn't pursue, but we felt its presence, heard branches snap as it paralleled our flight. Once I glanced back to see it stride across a ravine in a single step. By some miracle, we reached the others. Harrison took one look at our faces and ordered immediate evacuation. We loaded Nicholas and fled Sector 9 like refugees from a war zone. The ride back was silent except for Nicholas's occasional whimpers. At the station, we waited for the medical helicopter. When paramedics asked what happened, Harrison cited bear attack. They didn't believe him but took Nicholas anyway. That night, Harrison called a full staff meeting. Coffee and whiskey flowed in equal measure as we discussed the undiscussable. "It's escalating," Thomas Wolfe said. He'd been at Devil's Backbone for 20 years, longest of any active ranger. The dogman hunting closer to civilization, the giant taking people. Next'll be the Wendigo waking up. Don't. Dylan Cross interrupted. Don't even say that name. Why? I asked. What's a Wendigo? The room went cold. Veterans who'd faced dogman packs and giant encounters suddenly found their coffee fascinating. Harrison finally answered. The Wendigo is different. Older. The dogman is territorial. The giant is reclusive. But the Wendigo is malevolent. It hates, it hungers, and it's smart. Smarter than the others. Where is it? Sector 13, the deep north. We don't patrol there. Haven't in 15 years, since we lost an entire team. An entire team? 6 rangers. Found them a week later, partially eaten, arranged in a ritual circle, and changed. The cold had preserved them, but they'd been altered. Bones broken and reset at new angles, organs removed and replaced in wrong positions. Like something had been practicing, learning how humans work. I slept poorly that night, dreaming of giants that spoke without words and monsters that rebuilt humans like broken toys. But worse was coming. 2 days later, Nicholas Kane spoke his first words since the encounter. The hospital called Harrison, who brought me along to hear the statement. Nicholas lay in psychiatric restraints, heavily sedated. His white hair framed a face aged decades and days. When he saw us, tears streamed down his cheeks. It showed me, he whispered. When it touched me, I saw. Saw what? Harrison asked gently. History. It's history. They were here first, before the ice, before the floods. When the world was different, they retreated as we spread, deeper and deeper into the last wild places. But we followed, always followed, building, cutting, taking. He gripped Harrison's hand with desperate strength. They're running out of room, out of time. The 3 tribes, Dogman, Giant, Wendigo, they've called a gathering, a council, to decide what to do about us. When? Harrison asked. Soon, when the snow comes, in the place where the rivers meet. Nicholas's eyes rolled back. They're going to war. God help us, they're going to war. The sedatives pulled him under. Harrison and I left in stunned silence. Outside, early autumn painted the trees in blood reds and bone yellows. Winter was coming to Devil's Backbone. Over the following weeks, evidence mounted. Trail cameras captured multiple dogmen moving together, unprecedented pack behavior. Hikers reported tree breaks in new sectors, the giant expanding its territory. And from Sector 13 came sounds, screaming winds that carried almost words, trees found stripped of bark in spiral patterns, animals fleeing south in unseasonable migrations. The Wendigo was waking. Harrison sent urgent reports to Washington. The response was predictable. Maintain containment, minimize public exposure, await further instructions. Bureaucracy moving at government speed while monsters planned our extinction. Then Isaac Sawyer disappeared. Sawyer was our technology specialist, maintaining the sensor network that gave early warning of creature movements. He'd gone to repair a damaged station in Sector 11, neutral ground between territories, safe theoretically. His last transmission, something's wrong. All the sensors are triggering, all of them. It's like, oh God, they're everywhere. We found his truck. We found his equipment. We found blood, but no body, no tracks. Like he'd been plucked from the earth by an invisible hand. That night, Harrison made a decision that would haunt us all. We're going to Sector 13, he announced. The Wendigo has Sawyer. We get him back or confirm his death. Either way, we learn what we're really facing. It was madness, but it was necessary. The rules were changing, the monsters were organizing, and we were running out of time. As we prepared for the expedition, I thought about Nicholas Kane's words. 3 tribes, a gathering, a decision about humanity's fate. We'd spent so long thinking we were the apex predators, the forest's masters, but we were guests, unwelcome guests who'd overstayed our welcome. Now the real owners were ready to evict us. The morning we entered Sector 13, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. October in northern Michigan was cold, but this was different, unnatural. The kind of cold that bit through layers and settled in your bones like a disease. Harrison led our team. Myself, Gabriel Chen, Thomas Wolfe, and 2 rangers I hadn't worked with before, Joshua Mills and Landon Hayes. Both had military backgrounds. Both had requested this assignment after losing friends to the creatures. Remember, Harrison briefed us at the sector boundary. The Wendigo isn't like the others. It was human once. That makes it worse. It knows how we think, how we fear, and it feeds on both. We'd all read the classified files. Wendigo psychosis, the transformation of human into monster through cannibalism and dark spiritual corruption. The Algonquin peoples had warned early settlers in times of desperate hunger, eating human flesh invited an ancient evil. The consumed became the consumer, twisted into something that existed only to feed. But the thing in Sector 13 was older than any human cannibalism. It was the original, the source, the first hunger given form. The forest changed as we penetrated deeper. Trees grew twisted, branches forming anatomically impossible angles. Ice covered everything despite the autumn date. Our breath misted in air that smelled of frozen meat and old copper. Motion sensors are going crazy, Joshua reported, checking his tablet, but nothing's moving. That's when we realized the trees themselves were triggering the sensors, swaying without wind, leaning toward us as we passed, watching. We found Isaac's trail after 3 hours of searching. Not footprints, drag marks. Something had pulled him north, his heels carving twin grooves in the frozen earth. The trail led toward the old-growth forest where trees predated European settlement. He was alive when it took him, Thomas observed. See the struggle marks? He fought. The drag marks ended at a clearing that shouldn't have existed. Perfectly circular, maybe 50 yards across. No trees, no brush, just dead ground covered in a thin layer of ice. In the center stood a structure that made my mind rebel. It was a tree, but wrong. Massive trunk twisted into a spiral, branches that reached down instead of up, roots that broke through the earth to form cage-like structures, and hanging from those roots. Jesus Christ, Gabriel whispered. Bodies, dozens of them. Some were fresh. Hikers reported missing over the last few months. Others were older, much older, mummified by cold and something else. All were partially eaten, but with surgical precision. Choice cuts removed, the rest preserved. Isaac hung from the lowest branch, still breathing, still aware. Get him down, Harrison ordered. Landon and I approached carefully. The ice creaked under our boots like breaking bones. As we reached Isaac, his eyes snapped open, filmed with frost, pupils contracted to pinpoints. Don't, he rasped. It's a trap. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Ice formed on our weapons. Our electronics died simultaneously. Phones, radios, sensors, all dead in an instant. Then we heard it. A sound like wind through a broken flute. Almost musical, almost words. It came from everywhere. The twisted tree, the frozen ground, the very air. Hungry. So hungry. Feed. Must feed. Defensive circle. Harrison barked. Now. We formed up, weapons facing outward. But how do you fight something you can't see? The sound grew louder, more complex. Not one voice, but dozens. All the consumed speaking in harmony. The first attack came from below. A hand burst through the ice, skeletal but impossibly strong. It grabbed Joshua's ankle, yanking him down. He screamed, firing wildly, as something pulled him toward the frozen earth. Landon grabbed his arms, playing tug-of-war with whatever lived beneath. More hands erupted. The preserved bodies were moving, animated by something that wore them like puppets. They crawled from the ground, from the tree roots, moving with jerky marionette precision. "Cut Isaac down," Harrison shouted, firing controlled bursts. "We're leaving. Now." I slashed at the roots holding Isaac while Gabriel covered me. The tree screamed, actually screamed, as black sap oozed from the wounds. Isaac dropped into my arms, unconscious but alive. That's when we saw it, the Wendigo. It materialized from the twisted tree like smoke-given substance, 15 feet tall but skeletal, as if someone had stretched a human body far beyond its intended dimensions. Gray skin pulled tight over visible bones, arms too long, ending in hands tipped with claws like surgical scalpels. The skull was the worst, human-shaped but wrong, eye sockets too large, jaw that unhinged like a snake's, and the teeth, rows and rows of teeth, all canine, all designed for tearing. But it still wore clothes, remnants of a ranger uniform from decades past, a name tag still readable, C. Morrison. Not Caleb Morrison, his grandfather, Charles, lost in Sector 13 in 1963. The Wendigo spoke with Charles Morrison's voice filtered through 60 years of hunger. "So, hungry, always hungry, you will feed me." It moved faster than thought. One moment it stood by the tree, the next it had Landon. Claws punched through his body armor like paper. He screamed once before the Wendigo's jaw unhinged, taking his head in a single bite. We ran, training forgotten, courage abandoned. We ran like rabbits from a wolf. The forest came alive around us. Trees reached out with branch fingers, the ground cracked, releasing more preserved corpses, and behind us the Wendigo followed. Not running, walking, knowing we couldn't escape. Thomas fell first. A root caught his foot, sending him sprawling. Before we could help, the earth opened beneath him. He vanished into a pocket of frozen soil, his screams muffled by dirt and ice. Gabriel and Harrison laid covering fire while I carried Isaac. Their bullets struck the Wendigo without effect. It walked through the gunfire, occasionally pausing to feed on the fallen. Then I remembered something from the old stories. Wendigos were creatures of eternal hunger. They fed on human flesh, but craved something more: fear, despair, the moment when hope died. "Stop running," I told Harrison. "It wants us afraid." "We should be afraid." "No, listen." I set Isaac down, turning to face our pursuer. "It's feeding on our terror, that's why it's walking. It could catch us any time." The Wendigo stopped, tilting its head at an impossible angle. Charles Morrison's voice emerged from that nightmare mouth. "Clever. Ranger. But, still, meat." "You were human once," I called out. "Charles Morrison. You had a family, a daughter. She's still alive, still wonders what happened to you." The creature paused. For a moment, something almost human flickered in those empty sockets. "No. Memory. Only. Hunger. I can help you remember. Put down my friend and I'll tell you about your daughter, about your life before the hunger." It was desperate, insane. But the Wendigo lowered Landon's remains. It approached slowly, cautiously, like an animal sensing a trap. "Tell me." I spoke of things I'd read in Morrison's file, his service record, his family, the daughter who became a teacher, the grandchildren he never met. With each word, the Wendigo seemed to shrink, the hunger in its voice replaced by something else: pain. "I remember. Sarah, my Sarah. What have I become?" "Something that can still choose," I said. "Let us go. Let Isaac go. End this." The Wendigo stood there, trembling. For a moment I thought we'd won. Then it screamed, a sound that shattered ice and sent birds fleeing for miles. When it spoke again, all humanity was gone. No choice, only hunger, always hunger. It charged. But in that moment of connection I'd bought us time. Gabriel had prepped something, a white phosphorus grenade, strictly forbidden but secretly carried. He pulled the pin and threw. The grenade exploded against the Wendigo's chest. White-hot chemical fire that burned at 5,000 degrees. The creature shrieked, clawing at flames that consumed even its supernatural flesh. We ran. Behind us, Sector 13 burned, the twisted tree, the preserved bodies, maybe even the Wendigo itself, though I doubted fire alone could kill something that old. We reached the truck as the forest erupted in flames. Harrison called in the fire, claiming equipment malfunction. Within hours, firefighting crews were battling a blaze that would consume thousands of acres. Isaac survived, though he never returned to duty. His report was sealed, classified beyond even our usual standards. The official story: equipment malfunction led to forest fire. Rangers Thomas Wolfe and Landon Hayes died heroically evacuating campers. But I knew the truth. We'd heard it badly, but the Wendigo wasn't dead. Creatures like that didn't die easily. They retreated, healed, waited. And we'd learned something crucial. The three tribes, Dogmen, Giant, Wendigo, weren't just predators. They were intelligent. They had history, memory, and they were coordinating. Nicholas Kane had been right. A gathering was coming. The fire raged for 2 weeks, consuming most of Sector 13. When it finally died, aerial surveys showed the damage. Miles of charred forest, the twisted tree reduced to ash. But also something else. Tracks, hundreds of them, converging on a central point from all directions. Dogman prints, giant footprints, and drag marks. The Wendigo had survived. They'd met during the fire, used the chaos as cover for their gathering. Winter arrived early that year. By November, Devil's Backbone was buried in snow. The forest fell silent. No attacks, no sightings. Even the motion sensor stopped triggering. "It's like they vanished," Gabriel said during a briefing. "Every creature, gone." "They're planning," Harrison replied. "Deciding. We hurt one of them, killed their packmates. They know we're a threat now." He was right. But we couldn't have predicted what came next. The messages started in December. Not radio calls or emails. Messages carved into trees, written in blood on snow, spelled out in arranged bones. All said the same thing: leave. Last warning. Some rangers did, requested transfers, quit outright. By Christmas, only 6 of us remained: Harrison, Gabriel, myself, and 3 newcomers too green to understand. That's when the rules changed completely. On December 21st, winter solstice, the longest night, Joshua Mills was standing watch. At exactly midnight, he radioed, "Chief, you need to see this." We rushed to the observation deck. Across the forest, lights, hundreds of them, not electric, not fire, cold blue lights that moved between trees with purpose. "What are they?" I asked. Harrison's face was grim. "Gathering lights. The tribes are calling their members, all of them." As we watched, the lights converged on a central point, the place where the 3 territories met, where the rivers crossed, where something ancient waited. "How many?" Gabriel whispered. I did rough calculations based on the lights. Hundreds, maybe thousands. We thought we were dealing with isolated creatures, a dogman pack here, a solitary giant there, one ancient Wendigo, but we were wrong. They were nations, peoples, civilizations hidden in the wild places, and they were uniting. "We need to evacuate," Harrison decided. "Full evacuation, let the military handle this." But the radio was dead, the phone lines cut, the road outblocked by fallen trees that hadn't been there hours before. We were trapped in Devil's Backbone, alone, while outside, an army of monsters prepared for war. That's when I remembered Isaac's final words before the sedatives took him, words that hadn't made sense until now. They're not planning to fight us. They're planning to reclaim, to take back what was theirs, and we're just in the way. The longest night had begun. The siege began at dawn, on December 22nd. We woke to find the ranger station surrounded by a wall of fog that shouldn't exist. Thick, white, impenetrable, and moving against the wind. "Stay inside," Harrison ordered, though none of us had any intention of leaving. "Windows locked, weapons ready. We hold until help arrives." But help wasn't coming. The fog wasn't natural. It blocked radio signals, satellite phones, even emergency beacons. We were cut off from the world, trapped in a pocket of reality where different rules applied. Gabriel had been on watch. He looked shaken, constantly glancing at the windows. I saw shapes in the fog, big ones, just walking, circling the station. We had 6 people, enough supplies for a month, and an arsenal that would make a militia proud. The station was built to withstand siege. Reinforced walls, steel shutters, backup generators, but it was designed for human threats, not this. The first test came at noon. A ranger we didn't recognize walked out of the fog. He wore an outdated uniform, moved with mechanical precision. When he reached the gate, he spoke with a voice like grinding stone. "Open, join, become." Through binoculars, I saw the truth. The ranger's eyes were gone, replaced by swirling fog. His movements were puppeteered. Something wore his body like a suit. "That's Benjamin Torres," Harrison whispered. "Lost in Sector 9, 3 years ago." The thing wearing Torres's body waited patiently. When we didn't respond, it turned and walked back into the fog. A messenger. By afternoon, more figures emerged. Lost hikers, missing hunters, rangers from decades past, all with fog for eyes, all speaking the same message: open, join, become. "They're showing us what happens if we resist," Carter Rodriguez said. He was our youngest, barely keeping panic at bay. We end up like them? We don't know that, Harrison lied. We all knew exactly what it meant. Night fell like a hammer. The fog pressed against the windows, searching for cracks. We took shifts watching, but there was nothing to see. Just white, endless white. Then the sound started. Scratching at the walls. Something testing the steel shutters. Footsteps on the roof, too heavy for any normal creature. And voices, hundreds of them. Whispering in languages that predated human speech. At midnight, the fog pulled back. We had a clear view for the first time in 18 hours. What we saw broke Carter completely. They stood in ranks. Organized. Military precision. Dogmen in the front. Dozens of them, standing upright. Weapons made of bone and stone in their clawed hands. Behind them, giants. More than I'd thought possible. Each carrying clubs made from entire trees. And scattered throughout the white-eyed puppets. The consumed. At the army's head stood 3 figures. The alpha dogman, twice the size of its kin. Fur silver with age. The giant elder, 20 feet tall, covered in moss and lichen like a walking forest, and the Wendigo, still bearing scorch marks from our phosphorus grenade, Charles Morrison's ranger uniform hanging in tatters. The Wendigo spoke, its voice carrying impossible distance. You were warned. Leave or join. Choose. We can't leave, Harrison shouted back. You've blocked the roads. Walk, as ancestors walked. Take nothing, leave all, never return. It was offering us exile, on foot in winter, through miles of hostile forest, a death sentence disguised as mercy. We need time, Harrison called, to decide, to vote. The 3 leaders conferred in their alien language. Then the Wendigo spoke again. Sunrise. Choose by sunrise. The army melted back into the fog, leaving us alone with an impossible decision. We debated through the night. Carter wanted to run, take our chances in the forest. Gabriel advocated fighting, go down swinging rather than flee. The newcomers were too terrified to contribute. There's a third option, I said as dawn approached. Negotiation. You can't negotiate with monsters, Gabriel spat. They're not monsters, they're people. Different people, but people. They have language, culture, hierarchy. They're offering terms. Maybe we can counter-offer. Harrison considered this. What terms could we possibly offer? The truth, full disclosure, tell the world they exist, end the cover-up, give them recognized territory, protected lands where humans can't go. The government would never. The government isn't here, we are, and they are. Maybe it's time someone started talking instead of shooting. As the sun crested the horizon, Harrison made his decision. Reed, you made contact with the Wendigo before, you'll be our negotiator. Sir. That's an order. Gabriel, cover him. Everyone else, defensive positions. I strapped on body armor, knowing it was useless. Took a radio, knowing it wouldn't work. Said prayers to gods I wasn't sure existed. Then I walked out to meet the monsters. They waited at the tree line. Up close, their impossible size was overwhelming. The giant elder looked down from a height that hurt my neck. The alpha dogman's eyes held intelligence older than civilization. The Wendigo smiled with too many teeth. I want to talk, I said. Really talk. Not threats, not demands. Communication. The 3 looked at each other. Silent conversation in body language. I couldn't read. Then the giant spoke. Its voice was earthquake deep. Words formed by a throat never meant for human speech. But I understood. Somehow, I understood. Talk is past. Time for action. You small ones take too much. Forest dies. People die. We die. I know, I said. And I'm sorry. But killing us won't stop it. More will come. With bigger weapons, they'll burn the entire forest to destroy you. The dogman growled. When it spoke, the words were clearer, more practiced. Let them come. We are many. They are few. This is our land. No, I said. You are few. We are many. 7 billion of us, growing every day. You can't fight that, but you don't have to. I explained my idea. Protected territories. Government recognition. Treaties. Coexistence, instead of extinction. They listened. The army behind them listened. Hundreds of impossible creatures hearing impossible ideas. You speak for all humans? The Wendigo asked. No, but I speak for a start. Someone has to. Let me try. Give me time to contact the outside, to make them understand. They will not listen. They never listen. Some will. Enough will. The world is changing. People are ready to accept that they're not alone, that there are others who deserve to exist. The 3 conferred again. This time, I caught fragments. Arguments about trust, about chances, about hope. Finally, the giant elder spoke. 3 days, you have 3 days, make them listen, or we end this. And my people? Stay. Insurance, you go, alone. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than massacre. I'll need proof, evidence. They won't believe without proof. The Wendigo smiled its nightmare smile. Take me. What? I go. Show them. Make them see what they created, what they fear. It was insane, bringing a Wendigo to civilization, but it was also brilliant, undeniable proof, a witness that couldn't be dismissed. The hunger? I control, for now, for this. I looked at Harrison, visible through the station windows. He nodded. What choice did we have? All right, we go together. The fog lifted, the army dispersed, and I found myself walking out of Devil's Backbone with humanity's nightmare as my companion. The journey was surreal. The Wendigo moved like smoke, sometimes visible, sometimes not. It didn't speak unless necessary, but its presence was constant. A cold spot in reality, a wrongness that made animals flee and plants wither. We reached the nearest town after 2 days of hiking. I'd worried about the Wendigo causing panic, but it had a solution. It could be invisible to most. Only those ready to see would see. A mental shield that protected both us and them. I made calls from a motel room, while the Wendigo waited outside, patient as winter. NSA, FBI, Interior Department. Anyone who might listen. Most hung up. Some laughed. A few, a precious few, asked questions. Finally, I reached Dr. Elizabeth Warner at the Department of Defense. She oversaw anomalous biological assets. She knew about Devil's Backbone. You're saying they want to negotiate? Yes. Recognition, protection, in exchange for peace. And you have proof? I looked at the Wendigo, visible now, standing in the corner like a nightmare made flesh. Yes. Stay where you are. We're coming. They arrived in black helicopters and unmarked vans. Military, scientists, people who dealt with the impossible. When they saw the Wendigo, even they paled. But they listened. For the first time in decades, someone with power listened. The talks began immediately. Video conferences with officials I'd never see. The Wendigo spoke for its people, all 3 tribes. Its hunger gave it unique perspective. It had been human. It understood both sides. Meanwhile, at Devil's Backbone, an uneasy truce held. The creatures waited. My team waited. Everyone waited to see if words could accomplish what weapons couldn't. On the 3rd day, an agreement was reached. Provisional, limited, but real. Devil's Backbone would be redesignated. No longer a national forest but a sovereign conservation zone, off-limits to development, minimal human presence. In exchange, the tribes would remain within boundaries. No hunting beyond borders, no expansion of territory. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. I returned with the news and a full government escort. The creatures emerged to hear the terms. Some accepted grudgingly, others with relief. The ancient conflict paused, though not ended. Harrison retired immediately, nerves shattered by the experience. Gabriel transferred to Alaska. Somewhere normal, he said, where monsters are just bears. I stayed. Someone had to. The first human liaison to the sovereign conservation zone, learning their languages, their cultures, building bridges between worlds that had been at war since humans first lit fires in the dark. The Wendigo returned to Sector 13, its duty done, but before it left it spoke to me one last time. You asked what I was. I am hunger, but also memory. I remember being human, remember choosing wrong. This time we all choose better. It disappeared into the forest and I never saw it again. But sometimes on cold nights I hear its voice on the wind. Not hunting, just remembering. The zone exists now, officially denied but real. Satellite images show only unbroken forest. But those of us who know can see the signs. Tree breaks that form messages, paths that lead to meetings. A peace held together by mutual fear and fragile hope. Tourists still vanish sometimes. Hikers who ignored warnings. Developers who thought rules didn't apply. The creatures haven't forgiven, haven't forgotten, but they're trying. We're all trying. That's the real horror of Devil's Backbone. Not that monsters exist, but that we created them through our greed, our expansion, our refusal to share the world. Every Wendigo was once a desperate human. Every dogman, a guardian pushed too far. Every giant, a gentle being forced to defend its home with violence. But there's hope too. If we could create monsters, perhaps we can create peace. One treaty at a time. One conversation at a time. One choice at a time. The forest is quiet now, not the ominous silence of before, but the peaceful quiet of a place finding balance. I patrol the borders, no longer as an enforcer, but as a translator. When creatures and humans meet, I help them speak. When conflicts arise, I mediate. It's dangerous work. Some days I wonder if I'll end up on the missing persons board. But it's necessary. Someone has to stand between worlds. Someone has to prove coexistence is possible. Because the alternative, the war Nicholas Kane prophesied, would end everything. The creatures know it, we know it, so we maintain this fragile peace, built on fear and necessity and the smallest spark of understanding. Devil's Backbone taught me that monsters aren't born. They're made, by hunger, by loss, by the terrible arithmetic of survival that says there isn't enough world for everyone. But maybe there is. Maybe there always was. We just had to learn to see each other clearly. To recognize the humanity in monsters. And the monsters in ourselves. 5 years have passed since the Treaty of Devil's Backbone. 5 years of uneasy peace between worlds that were never meant to meet. I'm writing this final account from my cabin on the border between human and other territory, watching the sunrise paint the forest in shades of gold and shadow. Today marks something unprecedented, the first joint council between species. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. The first year after the treaty was chaos. Washington wanted to study the creatures, contain them, weaponize them. The others, as they chose to be called collectively, wanted humans gone entirely. I spent months in negotiations that went nowhere, translating between military officials who saw only threats and ancient beings who saw only invaders. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: children. A family of campers had ignored warnings, entering the zone with 2 kids, Micah age 7 and Emma age 5. When the parents realized their mistake, panic set in. They fled, leaving behind their tent, supplies, and Emma's stuffed rabbit. A giant found them. By all rights, it should have ended in tragedy. But the giant, a younger one, only 12 feet tall, didn't attack. It observed the terrified family, then did something unprecedented. It returned Emma's rabbit. The girl, too young to know fear, said, "Thank you, Mr. Treeman." The giant's name, I learned later, was Jeremiah, who remembers. He'd watched human families from afar for decades, curious about creatures so small yet so destructive. When Emma smiled at him, something shifted in his ancient heart. He escorted the family to safety. Word spread through both communities. A giant showing mercy, a child showing trust. It wasn't much, but it was enough to restart negotiations with a different framework. Not military to monster, but people to people. I established the exchange program 6 months later. Volunteers from both sides would spend time in each other's territory, supervised and safe, learning. The first human volunteer was Dr. Sarah Morrison. Yes, Charles Morrison's daughter. She wanted to understand what had taken her father, what he had become. The first other volunteer was a young dogman named Nathan, born running. Barely adult by their standards, curious about the humans his elders taught him to fear. The exchanges were disasters at first. Humans couldn't handle the otherness, the way reality bent around ancient beings, the wrongness that pressed against sanity. Others couldn't handle human cities, the noise, the stench, the overwhelming presence of iron that burned their skin. But we adapted. We learned. Sarah Morrison spent 3 months in Sector 13, studying Wendigo culture. She learned they weren't mindless hunters but beings caught between 2 natures, constantly fighting the hunger that defined them. They had art, horrible art made of bones and sinew, but art nonetheless. They had oral histories stretching back to the Ice Age. They had names for constellations humans had never noticed. Nathan, born running, spent his exchange in Detroit, living with a family who ran a veterinary clinic. He learned about human medicine, about our relationship with animals, about cities as ecosystems. He discovered television and became obsessed with nature documentaries, frustrated by their inaccuracies, but fascinated by the attempt to understand. The real change came when Nathan saved a child from a burning building. His inhuman strength and speed made him a hero overnight. News footage of a 7-foot wolfman carrying a toddler to safety broke something in the public consciousness. The secret was out, but not as horror, as hope. The government tried damage control, but it was too late. Videos surfaced, testimonies from rangers, evidence accumulated until denial became impossible. The world had to accept that we weren't alone. The reaction was mixed. Religious groups called it the end times. Scientists demanded access. Conspiracy theorists felt vindicated, but mostly people were curious. They wanted to know more about the others who had shared our world in secret for so long. I became the unofficial spokesperson, giving interviews that walked the line between truth and necessary fiction. Yes, the others existed. No, they weren't planning invasion. Yes, they were dangerous. So were humans. We were working on coexistence. The second year brought the poachers. Humans who saw the others as trophies, who thought ancient beings would make excellent specimens, who believed the treaty was weakness and the zone was full of monsters to be harvested. They entered in force one autumn night, 20 men with military-grade weapons and hearts full of greed. They were after a specific target, the Alpha Dogman's pelt, which rumors said granted immortality. They never made it out. But not because the others killed them, because I stopped them. You see, the treaty made me more than a translator. It made me a guardian of the border, and the zone had changed me. 5 years of exposure to places where reality was thin, to beings that existed partially outside our dimension, had left its mark. I could see in the dark now, move through the forest like smoke, feel the zone's heartbeat in my bones. I found the poachers setting snares with silver wire, preparing ambush sites with chemical weapons, planning massacre with corporate efficiency. Turn back, I told them. Stepping from shadows they swore were empty. This is your only warning. They laughed, pointed guns, threatened. So I showed them what the zone had taught me, how trees could move when asked politely, how shadows had substance, if you knew their names, how the forest itself would defend those who defended it. 18 poachers fled, minds intact but forever changed. 2 stayed, 2 broken by what they'd seen to move. The zone took them, not killed, transformed. They wander the deep forest now, not quite human, not quite other, border guards like me, but voluntary. The Alpha found me afterward, standing over discarded weapons and abandoned cruelty. You protect us. Its voice held surprise. Human protects monsters. No, I said. Ranger protects forest, that's all I've ever been. Something changed that night. The others began to see not all humans as threats. Some could be allies, some could be trusted. The third year brought the sickness. It started with the Wendigos. The endless hunger that defined them began to fade. Not healing, they would always be what they were, but easing. Some remembered their human names, some asked about descendants, some wanted to die. Charles Morrison was among them. He approached the treaty line on a full moon calling for his daughter. Sarah came. I'll never forget that meeting. Father and daughter separated by decades and species. He couldn't approach, the hunger still clawed at him, demanding he feed, but he could speak, could remember. I'm sorry, he whispered through tears of frozen blood. So, sorry, chose wrong, became wrong. I forgive you, Sarah said. I forgive you, Dad. He collapsed then, the Wendigo curse fighting the human soul. But something broke. The endless hunger cracked. Not gone, but resistible. Other Wendigos experienced similar breaks. Meeting descendants, hearing forgiveness, remembering who they were before the hunger took them. It wasn't a cure. Nothing could undo what they'd become, but it was healing of a sort. The giants revealed the cause. Deep in Sector 9, they guarded a grove older than mountains, trees that remembered when the world was young. The treaty, the peace, the slow healing of old wounds. It had awakened something in those ancient woods, a force opposite to the corruption that created Wendigos. Not purification, balance. The fourth year brought integration. Selected others began living part-time in human communities. Nathan, born running, got a job at the Detroit Zoo, using his intimate knowledge of animal behavior. A giant named Aaron Remember Sky became a forest ranger in Oregon, able to reach fires others couldn't. Even a stabilized Wendigo, calling himself Christopher, who chose poorly, worked with search and rescue, his supernatural senses finding lost hikers. Humans began entering the zone for more than research. Artists sought inspiration in impossible geometries. Musicians recorded the giants' stone throats singing. Writers collected stories older than civilization. We were learning from each other, but not everyone approved. The purists emerged, humans who saw integration as corruption, others who viewed it as betrayal. Conflicts erupted. A dogman working construction in Minnesota was shot with silver bullets. A human researcher in the zone was found arranged in a warning pattern. Both communities demanded justice. Both got it. The shooter faced trial by human law. The arrangers faced judgment by other tradition. Punishment was harsh but fair. The message was clear. Violence against either species would not be tolerated. Which brings us to today. The 5th year. The Council. Representatives from every human government and other tribe are gathering at the treaty ground, the clearing where I first negotiated with monsters who weren't monsters. They're here to formalize what we've built, to create laws that govern both worlds, to plan a future where humans and others coexist. I can see them arriving now. Military convoys carrying diplomats, giants striding through trees, dogmen in ceremonial bone armor, even Wendigos, hunger controlled through constant effort representing those caught between natures. Harrison is here, pulled from retirement to witness what his station protected for so long. Gabriel flew in from Alaska, admitting the normal bears weren't as interesting as he'd hoped. Sarah Morrison leads the human scientific delegation. Nathan Bourne running represents integrated others. And me? I'm the bridge. Neither fully human anymore nor truly other. Changed by the zone into something in between. I'll translate not just language but understanding. Help beings separated by evolution and mythology find common ground. The sun is climbing now. The council begins soon. I should go, but first, let me tell you what I've learned in 5 years of standing between worlds. Monsters exist, but they're not what we thought. They're not evil incarnate or mindless beasts. They're people. Different people. People shaped by impossible circumstances into impossible forms. The Wendigo chose cannibalism and desperate hunger and paid an eternal price. The dogmen evolved to protect sacred spaces and became warriors by necessity. The giants remember when the world was empty and struggled to find space in our crowded age. We created each other, humans and others. Our expansion forced their evolution. Their resistance shaped our fears. We're bound together by blood and legend, terror and necessity. But we can choose differently. Every day we can choose understanding over fear, communication over violence, coexistence over extinction. It won't be easy. Prejudice runs deep on both sides. There will be setbacks, tragedies, those who refuse to accept change. But the alternative, the war Nicholas Kane saw coming, would end everything. So we try. One treaty at a time, one friendship at a time, one choice at a time. The others taught me that humanity isn't about shape or species. It's about recognition, seeing ourselves in the other, seeing the other in ourselves, finding connection across impossible differences. Devil's backbone remains dangerous, always will be. Some borders shouldn't be crossed, some mysteries shouldn't be solved, some hungers shouldn't be fed. But it's no longer just a place of horror, it's a place of hope, where monsters and humans meet as equals, where ancient wrongs slowly heal, where the future is being written by all of us together. I'm Marcus Reed, Park Ranger, Treaty Guardian, Bridge Between Worlds, and I'm heading to a council that will determine whether our species can share this planet. Wish us luck, all of us, human and other alike. We're going to need it. I became a park ranger because I loved the silence. That pristine, crystalline quiet you only find miles from civilization, where the loudest sound is your own breathing and the whisper of wind through pine needles. I thought I understood the wilderness. I thought I knew what lived in those dark spaces between the trees. I was wrong. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I saw during my years patrolling the northern forests of Michigan, and what I've learned about the things that share these woods with us, things that have always been here, long before we carved our trails and built our ranger stations, long before we pretended to own land that will never truly belong to anyone human. It started in October, 3 years into my career at Hiawatha National Forest. I'd drawn the late shift, which meant closing the visitor center at dusk, and doing a final patrol of the campgrounds before heading back to my cabin. The temperature had dropped fast that evening, and most campers had already packed up and left, eager to get home before the predicted storm rolled in. All except one. Matthew was a solo hiker, mid-30s, from downstate. He'd checked in that morning with a permit for backcountry camping, planning to spend 3 nights on the northern trails. I remembered him clearly because he'd asked good questions about bear safety and water sources. He seemed experienced, prepared, not the type to cause problems. But when I reached his designated camping area that evening, his tent was shredded. Not torn, not ripped by wind or damaged by an animal looking for food. Shredded, long, deliberate cuts through the nylon, as if something with claws had methodically destroyed it. His gear was scattered across the site. Sleeping bag, cooking equipment, water bottles, all of it trampled into the dirt, but no blood, no signs of struggle beyond the destroyed tent itself. And no Matthew. I called it in immediately, and within 30 minutes we had a search team assembling. Park Supervisor Harrison coordinated from the station while 6 of us spread out in a grid pattern, calling Matthew's name into the growing darkness. We had maybe an hour of usable light left. I took the northeastern quadrant following a game trail that wound deeper into old-growth forest. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than my truck, their canopies so dense that even at midday the forest floor remained in perpetual twilight. Now with night coming on fast, it felt like walking through a tunnel that grew narrower with each step. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a wolf. I've heard wolves, plenty of them. They have a clear, almost musical howl that rises and falls. This was different. Lower, rougher, with a quality that made something ancient in my brain scream danger. It started as a low rumble, then built into a howl that seemed to come from something with a chest cavity much larger than any wolf. And underneath that howl, I swear I heard something else. Something almost like words. I stopped walking. My hand went to the radio on my belt, but I didn't key it. Not yet. I needed to be sure. The howl came again, closer this time. Close enough that I could tell it was moving, pacing parallel to my position about 50 yards to the east. I turned my flashlight in that direction and saw nothing but trees and undergrowth. But I felt it watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and every instinct I had screamed at me to run. I didn't run. I'm not proud of that. It wasn't courage. My legs simply wouldn't move. Fear had locked my muscles, turned me into a statue with a flashlight. Then I saw the eyes. They were too high off the ground. That was the first thing my brain registered. Wolf eyes shine in flashlight beams, reflecting back that distinctive green-gold eye shine. These eyes were amber, burning like coals, and they were at least 6 feet off the ground, maybe higher. The second thing I noticed was that they weren't side by side. Not quite. They were angled forward, positioned more like human eyes than a wolf's. Predator's eyes, hunter's eyes. Matthew? My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. I don't know why I said his name. Maybe some part of me wanted to believe this was just our missing hiker, confused and scared in the darkness. The eyes blinked, slowly, deliberately. Then it moved. I can't properly describe that movement. It was too fast, too fluid. One moment those eyes were 50 yards away. The next they were gone, and I heard something massive crashing through the undergrowth, moving away from me, but not fleeing, not running scared, just leaving, because it chose to. My radio crackled. Harrison's voice. Any sign of the missing hiker? We're getting heavy weather moving in. I keyed the mic with shaking hands. Negative, but I heard something big. Bear? I hesitated. Maybe, I'm heading back to the rally point. But I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't howl like that. Bears don't have eyes that burn like hot metal. Bears don't stand 6 feet tall and move through dense forests like smoke. We called off the search when the storm hit, agreeing to resume at first light. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing that howl in my head, kept seeing those eyes, and I kept thinking about Matthew's shredded tent, wondering what had done that and why. The next morning, we found Matthew. He was 3 miles from his campsite, wedged into a hollow beneath an overturned tree. He was alive, barely, curled into a ball and shaking despite the emergency blanket we wrapped around him. His clothes were torn, his face and arms covered in scratches from running through the woods. But the scratches were self-inflicted, defensive wounds from shoving through underbrush at full speed. When the paramedics finally got him stabilized enough to talk, he wouldn't say much, just kept repeating the same phrase over and over. It walked like a man, but it wasn't a man. I was there when Harrison tried to interview him more thoroughly, before they loaded him into the ambulance for the drive to the hospital in Manastic. Can you describe what you saw? Harrison asked, his notebook ready. Matthew stared past him, eyes unfocused. It was watching my tent. All evening just watching from the trees. I could see its outline when it moved. Like a huge dog, but wrong, too big. And when it came closer, he swallowed hard. When it came closer, I saw it walking, on 2 legs. Walking upright, like a person, but hunched forward. Its head was all wrong, elongated like a dog's snout, but the way it moved, the way it turned its head to look at me. What did you do? Harrison's pen was motionless above the paper. I ran. I grabbed my flashlight, and I ran as fast as I could. I don't remember much after that, just branches hitting my face and that thing behind me. I could hear it following, staying just at the edge of my flashlight beam, sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes on 2. It chased me for hours. Why did it stop? Matthew finally focused on Harrison's face. I don't think it did stop. I think it let me go. The official report listed the incident as a black bear encounter. Matthew's tent had been damaged by animal activity, and he'd panicked and fled. His scratches and abrasions were consistent with running through dense forest at night. No mention of anything walking on 2 legs. No mention of the howl I'd heard, or the eyes I'd seen. But I noticed things after that night. When we went back to recover Matthew's gear, I saw the tracks around his campsite. The official explanation was bear, but I'd seen plenty of bear tracks. These were different, larger, deeper, and some of them showed distinct claw marks, 5 toes, like a canine print, but massive. And in the soft mud near the stream, I found something else, a print that looked almost human-shaped, but elongated with claw marks at the toes. I took photos on my personal phone. I didn't turn them in with my report. That winter, I started researching. I spent my off hours in the ranger station's library and on the internet, digging through historical accounts and witness reports. I found more than I expected. Hundreds of reports from across Michigan's Upper Peninsula, going back decades. Hunters, campers, locals, all describing the same thing, something that moved like a wolf but walked like a man, something with a dog-like head and burning eyes, something that howled in the darkness and watched from the shadows. The old-timers had a name for it, Dogman. Most of the reports followed a pattern. The creature would observe people from a distance, pacing them, making its presence known through howls and the sound of heavy movement in the undergrowth. Rarely did it attack. When it did make direct contact, it was usually defensive. Someone had gotten too close to what might have been a den or territory marker. But there were exceptions, cases where it seemed to deliberately terrorize people, chasing them, stalking them, toying with them, the way a cat toys with prey. I found a report from 1987, a hunter named Ezra, who'd been camped in the same area of Hiawatha where Matthew had pitched his tent. Ezra described waking to find something circling his camp, moving on 2 legs but dropping to 4 to investigate his gear. He'd fired a warning shot into the air, and the creature had fled, but not before he'd gotten a clear look at it in his lantern light. Built like a powerful man, he'd written, but covered in dark fur. Its head was the worst part, too long, mouth full of teeth when it snarled at me, eyes that reflected my light like a dog's eyes, but with something behind them, something that knew what I was. Ezra had never gone back to the woods. According to the report, he'd sold all his hunting equipment and moved to the city. I understood why. By the time spring arrived, I'd made a decision. I requested a transfer to a different forest, a different state. I told myself it was for career advancement, a chance to work in a more prestigious park. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Not of dying. I'd made peace with that risk when I took the job. Rangers die in the wilderness. Falls, exposure, animal attacks. It happens. But what I'd seen in those amber eyes wasn't a natural predator. It was something else. Something that understood it was being observed and chose to make itself known. Something that had intelligence behind those burning eyes. Something that had let Matthew live, but only after terrorizing him for hours in the darkness. My transfer was approved, but I never made it out of Michigan. Because 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, we got another missing hiker report, and this time the creature didn't just watch. The Pacific Northwest had always felt different to me. I'd visited Oregon once, years before everything happened in Michigan, and I remembered being struck by the weight of the forests there. Not just their size, though the trees were enormous, but their presence. The way they seemed to press in around you, ancient and watchful. After my transfer request fell through due to budget cuts, I put in for a different position, a 6-month assignment to Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington State, helping with trail maintenance and wildlife surveys. They approved it within a week. I think Harrison was relieved to see me go. I'd become quiet jumpy. I'd stopped volunteering for night shifts. Other rangers had started to notice. I arrived in Washington in late April, when the forest was still sodden from winter rains, and the undergrowth was so thick you couldn't see 10 feet into the trees. My supervisor was a veteran ranger named Gabriel, a lean man in his 50s who'd worked in these woods for nearly 30 years. He had the kind of face that weather carves into something harder than stone and eyes that didn't miss much. On my second day, he took me on a patrol of the backcountry areas, showing me the trails I'd be responsible for maintaining. "You come from Michigan?" he asked as we hiked up a steep switchback. "Yes, sir. Hiawatha National Forest. Good woods out there. Different from here. Flatter." He paused to drink from his water bottle. "What made you want to transfer west?" I'd prepared an answer for this question. Career development, new experiences, a chance to see a different ecosystem. But something in Gabriel's steady gaze made the rehearsed words die in my throat. "I needed a change," I said finally. "Had a rough incident with a missing hiker. It shook me." At the time I thought he was being philosophical, maybe even hazing the new guy with some local superstition. I volunteered immediately. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid anymore. Maybe I just wanted to help find Carter before whatever took him did something worse. Either way, I was in the first truck heading up the logging roads toward his camp. It was raining, not the light drizzle I'd grown accustomed to in Washington, but a heavy, drenching downpour that turned the dirt roads to mud and reduced visibility to almost nothing. By the time we reached the trailhead where we'd have to continue on foot, my rain gear was soaked through and water was running down my back in cold rivulets. I measured the track with my hand. It was at least 16 inches long, 7 inches wide. The depth and the spacing between steps suggested a stride length of over 6 feet. What kind of person could fake this, and why would they be out here in this weather? It was thick and organic, like wet fur and rotting vegetation mixed with something else. Something that reminded me of a zoo on a hot day, that distinct predator musk that makes your hindbrain light up with warning signals. "Do you smell that?" I asked Isaac. He nodded, his face pale. His hand had moved to the bear spray on his belt. We found Carter's base camp, 30 yards further down the embankment. Or what was left of it. The tent had been destroyed, not shredded like Matthew's but literally torn apart. The fabric and poles scattered across a 50-foot radius. His equipment was everywhere. Sleeping bag in a tree, camp stove crushed flat, food containers broken open. But it wasn't random destruction. It looked methodical, like something had systematically dismantled his entire campsite. And then we saw the trees. 3 large Douglas firs at the edge of the camp had been stripped of their bark at a height of 8 to 9 feet off the ground. Long claw marks gouged into the pale wood beneath, as if something had stood on its hind legs and scraped at the trees with deliberate force. The bark lay in shreds at the base of each tree. The creature stopped in the middle of the creek, maybe 20 feet away. This close I could see the individual strands of hair plastered to its body, could see the rise and fall of its chest as it breathed, could see the way its fingers flexed, long fingers, almost human but thicker, stronger. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then it made another sound, softer this time. Not aggressive, almost questioning. It was trying to communicate. "We're not here to hurt you," I said. My voice shook but I kept talking. "We're looking for someone, a young man. Have you seen him?" The creature's head tilted slightly, the movement eerily human. Then it raised one massive arm and pointed downstream along the creek. It pointed. With deliberate, unmistakable intention, it pointed in a specific direction. Then it turned, moving with surprising grace for something so large, and walked back across the creek. It climbed the far embankment in 3 powerful strides, and disappeared into the forest. Within seconds, even the sound of its movement was gone, absorbed by the rain and the endless trees. Isaac was trembling. "What was that? What the hell was that?" "Bigfoot," I said. The word felt strange in my mouth, ridiculous and inadequate. "Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. That's not real. Those aren't real. You just saw it." We stood there in the rain, neither of us quite able to process what had happened. Then my radio crackled, Gabriel's voice distorted by static. "Found fresh tracks near the northern ridge. Large bipedal. Be advised." I keyed the mic. "Copy that. We found Carter's camp. It's been destroyed. And Gabriel, we saw it. The thing that made the tracks." Silence on the radio. Then, "Say again." We had visual contact with a large bipedal creature, 9 feet tall, covered in hair. It pointed us downstream. More silence. When Gabriel's voice came back, it was carefully neutral. "Follow that lead. We'll meet you at the downstream junction, and keep your radios on." We followed the creek, moving slowly through the rain. The terrain was treacherous, all loose rocks and slick mud. After about a quarter mile, Isaac grabbed my arm again. Carter was sitting under an overhang of rock, wrapped in an emergency blanket. He was alive. "Jesus Christ," Isaac breathed, and we both rushed forward. Carter looked up as we approached. His face was scratched, his lips blue with cold, but he was conscious and alert. "The Rangers," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank God, I've been waiting for you. Are you hurt?" I knelt beside him, already checking for injuries. "What happened?" "Something destroyed my camp last night. Something huge. I grabbed what I could and ran." He paused, shivering. "But it didn't chase me. It herded me, kept pushing me in this direction, away from the destroyed camp. And then this morning, it led me here, to shelter." "It?" Isaac asked. "What are you talking about?" Carter met my eyes. "You saw it too, didn't you? I can tell by your face you saw it." I nodded slowly. "It's been watching me for weeks," Carter continued. "I'd catch glimpses on my trail cameras, always at a distance. I thought I was imagining things. But last night when the storm got bad, it came into my camp, and I swear to God it was checking on me, making sure I had shelter. When it saw I didn't, when it saw how bad my tent situation was, it got agitated, started pacing. Then it tore everything apart, and I thought I was going to die." He laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. "But it kept pointing down here. So I followed, and I found this overhang." We got Carter back to the trailhead, and then to the hospital. Hypothermia, dehydration, minor cuts and scrapes, nothing that wouldn't heal. The official report said he'd been caught in the storm and became disoriented, destroying his own camp in confusion before finding shelter. No mention of the tracks, No mention of what Isaac and I had seen in the creek. But Gabriel pulled me aside before I left for the day. We were standing in the parking lot of the ranger station, rain still falling in sheets around us. "I have worked these woods for 3 decades," he said quietly. "I've seen things I can't explain. Most rangers have, if they're honest. We don't talk about it because people think we're crazy. Because it's easier to write bear on a report than to try to explain something that shouldn't exist." "What do you think it is?" "I think these mountains are older than our understanding. I think there are things living here that were here before us and will be here after we're gone. And I think they mostly want to be left alone." He looked at me steadily. "Whatever you saw in Michigan, whatever made you transfer out here, that's different. That was something malevolent. But this, what we have in these woods, it's not hostile, territorial maybe, protective of its space, but not evil. Carter could have died, but he didn't, because it helped him." Gabriel pulled his hood up against the rain. "Nature isn't always red in tooth and claw. Sometimes it's just other, beyond our categories. The best thing we can do is respect that." I stayed in Washington for the rest of my contract. I never saw the creature again, though I found tracks a few more times during backcountry patrols. Always far from human activity. Always in the deepest, most remote sections of the forest. Carter finished his research and published a paper on elk migration. He never mentioned what happened in his acknowledgments. Never spoke publicly about what he'd experienced. But when I ran into him months later at a ranger conference, he pulled me aside. "I still see it sometimes in my trail camera footage," he said. "Just glimpses, a shadow moving between trees, an outline in the background. It's still out there, still watching." He paused. "I don't think it's alone either. I think there are more of them. Families, maybe. A whole hidden population. Does that scare you?" He thought about it. "No, it gives me hope that there are still mysteries in the world, still wild places that belong to something other than us." I understood what he meant. The thing in the creek hadn't been a monster despite its size and strangeness. It had been a creature, doing what creatures do, surviving, protecting its territory, even showing what might have been compassion when a human stumbled into its domain. But I also remembered those amber eyes in Michigan. The deliberate terror inflicted on Matthew, the malevolence in that howl. Not all mysteries are kind. And the wilderness, I was learning, contained multitudes. After Washington, I took a year off, burned through my savings, worked part-time at an outfitter's shop, tried to pretend I was done with the deep woods. But the wilderness had gotten into my blood, and by the following autumn, I found myself applying for ranger positions again. The job offer came from Minnesota, a seasonal position at Superior National Forest, working the Boundary Waters region along the Canadian border. It was remote, brutal in winter, and exactly the kind of place I both craved and dreaded. I arrived in October when the leaves were turning and the first frost had already touched the ground. My supervisor was a compact, efficient woman named Luca who ran the Northern District with the precision of a military operation. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, and she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Winter comes hard up here," she told me during my orientation. "By December we're down to skeleton crew and you might go weeks without seeing another person. The Boundary Waters freeze solid, wolves come down from Canada, and the tourists who do show up are usually ill-prepared." She fixed me with a sharp look. "You handled backcountry alone before?" "Yes, ma'am. 3 years in Michigan, 6 months in Washington." "Good, because alone is what you'll be most of the time." She pulled out a map and marked several areas with a red pen. "These sections are your responsibility. Patrol when you can, but priority is the warming shelters and emergency caches. People die out here when they're not prepared." I settled into the work quickly. The forest was different from either Michigan or Washington, harder, colder, less forgiving. The trees were smaller, bent by constant wind, and the lakes were dark as obsidian. Even in autumn there was a sharpness to the air that promised the coming winter would be severe. November arrived with the first real snow, then December came, and with it the cold. The kind of cold that burns your lungs and turns exposed skin numb in minutes. The kind of cold that kills. I was doing a routine patrol of the southeastern boundary when I met Anthony. He was Ojibwe, mid-60s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He lived in a small cabin about 5 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by snowmobile or a brutal cross-country ski. I'd stopped to check on him protocol during the deep cold snaps and found him sitting on his porch despite the temperature being well below zero. "Come in," he said when he saw me. "You'll freeze out here." His cabin was small but warm, heated by a wood stove that radiated fierce heat. He poured me coffee from a battered pot and sat down across from me at a rough-hewn table. "You're the new ranger," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Just checking on folks during the cold spell, making sure everyone has enough supplies. He nodded slowly. You seem like a good person, so I'll tell you something. He leaned forward. The old ones are hungry this winter, hungrier than I've seen in years. The old ones? The winter spirits. The ones who walk when the snow gets deep and the deer are scarce. He saw my confusion and smiled, but there was no humor in it. You don't know the stories. The White Rangers never do. They come up here thinking they understand the wilderness, but they don't understand anything. I'm listening, I said carefully. Anthony was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. My grandfather told me about them. The things that used to be human. The ones who tasted flesh during the starving times and became something else. Something that can never be satisfied, never be full. They're real, Ranger. And when winter gets bad, really bad, like it's going to be this year, they come down from the deep woods. You're talking about the Wendigo. His eyes snapped to mine. You know the name. I know the stories. Just stories, though. Stories. He shook his head. You see those tracks yet? The ones that look almost human but with claws? The ones that are too big, stride too long? My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. I haven't seen any tracks like that. You will, and when you do, you'll remember this conversation. He stood and went to the window, looking out at the white landscape. 3 winters ago, we had hikers go missing. 2 of them, young men from Minneapolis, found one 3 weeks later, 8 miles from where he'd disappeared. Found him in pieces, scattered across half a mile of forest. The other one they never found at all. Animal predation. No animal eats like that. No animal takes only certain parts and leaves the rest. And no animal makes the sounds we heard that winter. He turned back to me, like screaming, like a woman in terrible pain echoing across the ice. But no woman, never a woman when you look, just those tracks and the smell of something dead. I left Anthony's cabin unsettled, but not yet believing. The Wendigo was folklore, a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation and starvation. It wasn't real. That's what I told myself for the next 2 weeks. The cold deepened. By mid-December, we were seeing sustained temperatures of 30 below zero. The few tourists who'd ventured into the boundary waters had long since left, and I was alone in my district, checking shelters and maintaining snowmobile routes. That's when Dylan went missing. He was a wildlife photographer, 42 years old, experienced and well-equipped. He'd gotten a permit for a winter camping trip, planning to photograph wolves and whatever other wildlife he could find. His itinerary had him camping at various points along the border lakes, moving every 2 or 3 days. When he missed his expected check-in by 48 hours, Luca sent me to investigate. I found his last campsite on the 3rd day of searching. It was on the shore of a frozen lake, protected by a stand of pine trees. His tent was still standing, but empty. The zipper was open, flapping in the wind, and snow had drifted inside. His sleeping bag was gone, along with his camera equipment, but his food cache was untouched, hanging from a tree branch exactly as protocol demanded. More concerning were the tracks. They circled his campsite in a wide perimeter, staying just at the edge of the tree line, human-sized, but the gait was wrong, too long between steps, and there were claw marks at the front of each impression, deep gouges in the frozen ground. I followed the tracks away from the camp. They led north, toward the Canadian border, across the frozen lake. The wind had scoured the ice clean in places, making the tracks intermittent, but I could follow the general direction. About half a mile from Dylan's camp, I found his camera. It was lying on the ice, the lens cracked, the body dented as if it had been thrown. The memory card was still inside. I pocketed it and continued following the tracks. That's when I heard the scream. It was exactly as Anthony had described, like a woman in agony, a sound of pure terror and pain. It came from ahead of me, somewhere in the white wilderness, and it made every hair on my body stand on end. I stopped walking. My hand went to the radio, but I was too far out. No signal this deep in the boundary waters. I was alone miles from the nearest help with something ahead of me that screamed like the damned. The sound came again. Closer this time. Not ahead anymore. To my left, in the trees along the lake shore. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line. For a moment I saw nothing. Just snow and pine and the gathering dusk. Then it moved. It was tall, over 7 feet, and thin in a way that seemed anatomically impossible. Skeletal, but with long ropey muscles visible beneath skin that was gray as ash. Its limbs were too long, the arms hanging past its knees, the fingers ending in black claws. The head was elongated, the skull visible through translucent skin, and its eyes were the worst part. Sunken deep into the skull, they burned with a yellow light that had nothing human in it, nothing sane. And it was staring directly at me. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body simply took over, turning me around and sending me fleeing across the ice. Behind me, I heard it scream again, that horrible agonized sound, and then the heavy thud of footfalls as it gave chase. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life. The ice was treacherous. Patches of snow hiding irregularities that could turn an ankle or send me sprawling. I didn't care. Terror overrode everything else. It was fast, impossibly fast for something that looked so emaciated. I could hear it gaining on me, could hear the scrape of its claws on the ice. My snowmobile was still half a mile away, back at Dylan's campsite. I'd never make it. Then I saw the ice fisherman's shelter. It was a small shack, one of several left on the lake by locals who knew which spots were best for pike and walleye. The door was partially open, swinging in the wind. I altered course and sprinted for it, my lungs burning from the frigid air. I reached the shelter and threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me. There was no lock, nothing to secure it with, so I braced my back against the wood and pushed with everything I had. The creature hit the door 3 seconds later. The impact nearly knocked me sprawling. The entire shelter shook and I heard wood splinter. It hit the door again and again, each impact accompanied by that terrible scream. Then, suddenly, silence. I stayed pressed against the door, gasping for air, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Very slowly, I turned and looked through the small window set into the door. It was standing 15 feet away, perfectly still, watching the shelter with those burning yellow eyes. This close, I could see details I'd missed before. Its skin wasn't just gray, it was covered in a fine pattern of cracks like old leather left too long in the sun. Its rib cage was visible, each bone defined, but the chest expanded and contracted with breath. It was alive, despite looking like a walking corpse. We stared at each other through that dirty window, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just hunting me, it was waiting. Patient, willing to stand there in the freezing cold for however long it took for me to either freeze to death or stupidly come out. I pulled out my phone, no signal, but I took photos anyway. Evidence, proof. Something to show people that I wasn't insane. The creature's head tilted as I raised the phone, almost curious. Then its mouth opened, wider than any human mouth should open, and I saw teeth, too many teeth, sharp and yellow, crowded together in a jaw that unhinged like a snake's. It screamed again, and the sound was so close and so loud that I felt it vibrate through my chest. Then it turned and walked away, not running, not fleeing, just walking back toward the tree line with that strange loping gait, its arms swinging. I stayed in that shelter for 4 hours. Only when full dark had fallen and I was shaking so hard from cold and fear that I could barely stand did I finally risk opening the door. The lake was empty. The creature was gone. I made it back to Dylan's camp in my snowmobile on pure adrenaline. Then I drove straight to the ranger station, breaking every safety rule about night driving in the wilderness. Luca was still there, working late. She took one look at my face and poured me coffee without asking questions. "We have to suspend the search," I said. "We have to close this entire district." "What happened?" I told her everything. The tracks, the scream, the creature. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Show me the photos." I pulled out my phone. My hands were still shaking as I found the images and handed her the device. She looked at each photo carefully. Her face went pale. "I've heard stories," she said finally, "from the old-timers, from the native guides, but I've never seen." She handed back my phone. "We can't tell anyone about this. You understand that, right? We report this, they'll pull your certification, say you're suffering from exposure, hallucinations."
What about Dylan?
"We keep searching, officially, but I'll make sure no one goes out alone and we stay in daylight hours only." She met my eyes. "And we pray we don't find him. Because if what you saw is real, Dylan's already gone." We found Dylan 4 days later. Parts of him, anyway, scattered across a mile of forest exactly as Anthony had described. The official report said wolves, pack predation, a tragic accident. But I'd seen the way the bones were broken, the way the flesh had been torn. No wolf did that, no natural predator. I stayed until my contract ended in March, but I never went back into the deep woods alone. And every night I dreamed of those yellow eyes and that terrible hungry scream. I visited Anthony before I left, told him everything that had happened. "You were lucky," he said. "It usually doesn't let people go. Something must have distracted it, made it move on." He paused. "Or maybe you weren't worth the effort. Too much fight in you, not enough meat on your bones. Is there any way to stop them? To kill them?" He shook his head. "The old stories say fire is the only way. Burn them completely, until there's nothing left but ash. But who's going to get close enough to do that? He fixed me with that penetrating stare. Better to avoid them. Stay out of the deep woods in winter. Don't travel alone. And if you hear that scream, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I left Minnesota in early April, when the ice was finally breaking up and the first signs of spring were returning to the forest. I'd survived 3 different encounters with 3 different creatures, and I was done tempting fate. I thought I was done with the wilderness entirely. But the woods don't let you go that easily. Once they've marked you, once you've seen what lives in the deep places, you're changed, and that change stays with you, no matter how far you run. I would learn that lesson one final time in the mountains of Montana, where all 3 nightmares converged in a way I could never have imagined. I spent 6 months away from ranger work after Minnesota. Took a job at my brother's construction company in Denver, working on suburban housing developments. Normal work, safe work. Every day I drove home to an apartment with locks and neighbors and streetlights, and every night I told myself I was content. But I wasn't. The city felt suffocating. Too many people, too much noise, too many walls. I'd catch myself staring at the mountains visible from my apartment window, feeling their pull like a tide. In August, I got a call from an old colleague named Lincoln. He'd taken a position as head ranger at a remote station in Montana's Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, and he needed experienced people for the fall season. It's real wilderness, he told me. 1,000,000 acres of backcountry, maybe 200 visitors all season. You'd have your own district, total autonomy. And if you need space, he paused. Well, there's plenty of space. I accepted the job the next day. The Bob Marshall Wilderness, locals call it the Bob, is everything the name implies. Vast, roadless, defined by jagged peaks and deep valleys that haven't changed since the glaciers retreated. The nearest town is 40 miles from the ranger station, and that's where the gravel road ends. Everything beyond that is accessible only by foot or horse. My district covered the northwestern quadrant along the Continental Divide. Lincoln had been right about the solitude. In my first 3 weeks, I encountered exactly 2 hikers and 1 outfitter leading a horsepacking trip. Otherwise, I had hundreds of square miles to myself. It should have been perfect. But from the beginning, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. I'd hike for hours without seeing wildlife, without hearing birdsong. The silence was oppressive, broken only by wind through the peaks and the sound of my own footsteps. Even the streams seemed muted, their usual chatter reduced to a sullen murmur. In late September, I was doing a patrol along the Chinese Wall, a massive limestone escarpment that runs for miles along the divide, when I found the first sign. Trees had been stripped of bark at shoulder height, the wood beneath scored with deep claw marks. Not bear marks. I knew bear marks. These were different. 4 parallel gouges, each cut several inches into the hardwood. I photographed them and moved on. Uneasy but not yet alarmed. 2 days later, I found tracks near a high mountain lake. Massive bipedal prints, each one pressed deep into the mud. The stride length was over 6 feet. The weight distribution suggesting something at least twice as heavy as a human. That evening, back at my patrol cabin, I pulled out the photos I'd taken in Washington, compared them to what I'd seen that afternoon. They matched perfectly. The next morning, I radioed Lincoln. I'm seeing signs of large wildlife in my district. Very large. Might want to issue an advisory. What kind of signs? Unusual tracks, tree damage, no scat or other confirmation yet, but it's worth monitoring. Lincoln knew me well enough not to ask too many questions. Keep me updated, and be careful out there. I was careful. Started carrying bear spray everywhere, even though I knew it probably wouldn't help against what I'd seen in Washington. Started making more noise when I hiked, announcing my presence. Started camping in areas with good visibility rather than tucked into protected spots. But careful wasn't enough. In early October, I met Thomas and Maverick at the trailhead where my district met the southern boundary. They were brothers, both in their early 20s, doing a 2-week backpacking trip before heading back to college. They'd already been out for 10 days and were planning to spend their last few nights in the high country before hiking out. "Seen anything interesting?" Thomas asked as I checked their permits. "It's been quiet," I said. "Maybe too quiet. You two staying on the established trails?" "Mostly," Maverick said. "We detoured a bit yesterday to get a better view of the wall." "Why?" I hesitated. What could I tell them? That I'd seen signs of something that shouldn't exist. That the forest felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Just be aware of your surroundings, make noise, keep your food secured. They promised they would, and headed up the trail. I watched them go, fighting the urge to call them back and tell them to leave the wilderness entirely. That night, I had the dream. I was standing in a clearing. moonlight turning everything silver and black. 3 shapes moved at the edges of the trees, circling, watching. One had amber eyes and moved on 4 legs but stood like a man. One was massive and covered in dark fur, its shoulders as wide as a truck. One was thin and gray, with yellow eyes that burned with hunger. They were communicating, not with sounds, but with something deeper, purpose, intent, and that purpose was focused on something in the center of the clearing. I looked down and saw Thomas and Maverick huddled together, their flashlights casting weak beams that couldn't penetrate the darkness around them. I woke up gasping, tangled in my sleeping bag. My cabin filled with moonlight streaming through the window. Just a dream. Stress. Too much time alone in the wilderness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been more than a dream. A warning, maybe, or a vision of something that was going to happen. At first light, I grabbed my pack and headed up the trail Thomas and Maverick had taken. I told myself I was just doing my job, checking on hikers in my district, but I was almost running, driven by an urgency I couldn't explain. I found their campsite just after noon. It was empty. The tent zipped shut, their packs leaning against a tree. A small camp stove sat cold on a flat rock. Everything looked normal, orderly, except for the tracks surrounding the site. 3 different sets, canine but too large. Sasquatch, unmistakable even though I'd only seen them once before, and the 3rd set, narrow, skeletal, with claw marks at the toes. They'd all been here, all 3 of them, not fighting, not competing, moving together with coordination. I keyed my radio. Lincoln, this is Patrol 6. I need immediate assistance at the following coordinates. We have missing hikers, multiple sets of unusual tracks, possible predator activity. Copy that. What kind of predators? I looked at the tracks again, trying to find words that wouldn't get me committed to a psych eval. Unknown species, large, multiple individuals, send everyone you can. It took 4 hours for the search team to reach my location. By then I'd found more signs, broken branches at 8 and 9 feet off the ground, patches of reddish-brown fur caught on bark, and a smell that distinctive predator musk I'd encountered in Washington, mixed with the rotting meat stench from Minnesota. We spread out in a search pattern. 6 rangers, combing the forest. I took the northwestern quadrant, following a game trail that climbed toward the ridgeline. That's where I heard them. First, the howl. That low rumbling vocalization that made my skeleton vibrate. Then the scream, the Wendigo's terrible cry of hunger and madness. And underneath both a deeper sound, a vocalization that resonated in my chest. The Sasquatch. They were calling to each other. I crested the ridge, and saw the clearing from my dream. All 3 creatures were there, arranged in a loose triangle around something in the center. The dogman paced on 4 legs, occasionally rising to its hind feet to look around. The Sasquatch stood motionless, massive and patient. The Wendigo swayed slightly, its skeletal frame somehow staying upright despite looking like it should collapse. And in the center, huddled together with their backs against a boulder, were Thomas and Maverick. They were alive, terrified, clearly hypothermic, but alive. The creatures weren't attacking them, they were guarding them, keeping them contained in the clearing. I don't know what made me step forward, maybe instinct, maybe desperation, maybe the simple knowledge that I couldn't leave those boys to whatever fate these things had planned. I walked into the clearing with my hands raised, making myself as visible and non-threatening as possible. All 3 creatures turned to look at me. The dogman's lips pulled back from its teeth, a low growl building in its chest. The Wendigo screamed, that horrible sound echoing off the mountains. But the Sasquatch, it just watched me with those deep, intelligent eyes. I'm not here to fight, I said, keeping my voice steady. Just let them go. They're just kids. They don't belong here. The Sasquatch made a sound, a low rumble that felt questioning. It looked at the dogman, then at the Wendigo. Some kind of communication passed between them, something I couldn't understand. Then the Sasquatch raised one massive arm and pointed, away from the clearing, away from the brothers, at me. You want me to leave? It pointed again, more emphatically. I understood. This wasn't my choice to make. This was something between them and the brothers, something I'd interrupted. My presence was the problem. But I couldn't leave. Wouldn't leave. No, I said simply. The dogman snarled and took a step forward. The Wendigo swayed closer, its yellow eyes locked on me, but the Sasquatch held up one hand, a stopping gesture as clear as any human command. And then Thomas did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. He stood up. Wait, he called out, his voice shaking but loud. It's not the Rangers' fault. We're the ones who went off trail. We're the ones who crossed into your territory. Maverick grabbed his brother's arm, trying to pull him back down, but Thomas shook him off and took a step toward the creatures. "We didn't mean any disrespect. We didn't know you were here. If we'd known." He spread his hands. "Please, just let us go. We'll tell everyone to stay away from this area. We'll make sure no one bothers you." The Sasquatch tilted its head, studying Thomas with what looked like curiosity. Then it turned to the other two creatures. More of that silent communication. The Wendigo screamed again, clearly disagreeing with whatever was being discussed. It took a step toward Thomas, its claws extended, but the Sasquatch moved between them. And despite the Wendigo being taller, the Sasquatch was far more massive. The confrontation only lasted a few seconds before the Wendigo backed down, retreating to the edge of the clearing. The dogman circled once, twice, then sat back on its haunches. The posture was so dog-like, so familiar, that it was almost comical, almost. Then the Sasquatch did something that I still can't fully explain. It walked to the brothers, moving slowly, deliberately. Thomas stood his ground, though I could see him shaking from 30 feet away. The creature actually knelt, bringing its face level with Thomas's. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then the Sasquatch reached out with one massive hand and so gently touched Thomas's chest, right over his heart. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, recognition, maybe even respect. Then it stood, turned, and walked back toward the tree line. The dogman rose and followed. Only the Wendigo remained, staring at us with those burning yellow eyes, its hunger almost palpable. The Sasquatch made a deep, commanding sound. The Wendigo screamed once more, frustrated, angry, but it too turned and disappeared into the forest. We stood in the clearing for a full minute, none of us moving. Then Thomas's legs gave out and he collapsed. Maverick was beside him instantly, and I ran to help. "Are you hurt?" I checked them both over quickly. "Did they touch you before I got here?" "No," Thomas said. His teeth were chattering. "They just herded us here, kept us contained. I thought they were going to kill us, but they just watched, waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" He looked at me with wide eyes. "I think they were waiting for you." We made it back to the ranger station by nightfall. Lincoln had a dozen questions, but I gave him abbreviated answers. Hikers got disoriented. I found them at a remote clearing, brought them back safely. No mention of what else was in that clearing. No mention of the impossible choice I'd made to walk in there unarmed. Thomas and Maverick stayed overnight at the station, too exhausted and traumatized to make the hike out. Before they left the next morning, Thomas pulled me aside. "What were those things?" "I don't know," I lied. Could have been a lot of things in the darkness. Easy to get confused. "Don't," he interrupted. "Don't insult me by pretending. I saw them clearly. We both did. And you weren't surprised. You knew what they were." I was quiet for a moment. "Then if I told you the truth, you wouldn't believe me. And if you did believe me, it would change how you see the world. Sometimes ignorance is kinder." "I want to know." So I told him about Michigan and the dogmen, about Washington and the Sasquatch, about Minnesota and the Wendigo, about how I'd encountered all three and survived, and how I'd never expected to see them together. "Why did they let us go?" he asked when I finished. I chose my words carefully. I think they were making a point, about territory, about boundaries. They brought you to that clearing to teach you something, that these mountains aren't empty, that humans don't own every wild place. And when you showed up, I think that changed things. I'd encountered all three before and survived. Maybe that meant something to them. Maybe they saw me as, I struggled for the word, an intermediary, someone who exists between their world and ours. Thomas was quiet, processing. "Then are you going to report this? Tell other rangers?" "No. Would you?" He smiled slightly. "No one would believe me anyway." They left that afternoon and I watched them hike down the trail until they disappeared from view. I never saw them again, though Thomas sent me an email a few months later. He'd transferred to a different college, switched his major to wildlife biology. He wanted to understand what he'd experienced, even if he could never prove it. I finished out my season in Montana, and then put in for a transfer. Not because I was afraid. I'd moved past fear after that clearing, but because I'd learned something important. The wilderness contains mysteries that aren't meant to be solved, creatures that exist in the spaces between known and unknown. And some of us are privileged or cursed to witness these mysteries. But witnessing doesn't mean understanding, and it certainly doesn't mean controlling. The best we can do is respect the boundaries, honor the territories, and remember that we're visitors in a world that was here long before us and will be here long after. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to walk away. After Montana, I requested a desk job. Lincoln tried to talk me out of it. Said I was one of the best field rangers he'd worked with, but I was insistent. I'd spent 5 years encountering things that shouldn't exist, and I needed time to process, time to be ordinary. They assigned me to the regional office in Missoula, handling permit applications and coordinating search and rescue operations from behind a computer screen. It was exactly as boring and safe as I'd hoped. For 6 months I filed paperwork, answered phones, and went home each night to an apartment that had never been within miles of anything unexplained. But you can't stay away from the wilderness once it's marked you. And the wilderness wasn't done with me yet. In March we started getting unusual incident reports from Glacier National Park. Missing time. Hikers reporting hours-long gaps in their memories, finding themselves miles from where they remembered being, equipment malfunctions, cameras with corrupted files showing only static, GPS units displaying impossible coordinates. Probably just equipment failure, my supervisor said when I mentioned the pattern. Cold weather plays hell with electronics. But I'd read enough reports to know this was different. These incidents were clustered in a specific area of the park, a remote valley on the western side, rarely visited even in summer, and they'd all occurred after dark. The incidents escalated in April. A group of experienced backpackers reported being stalked by something that moved between the trees on 2 legs but vanished whenever they turned their flashlights directly toward it. A wildlife photographer found tracks around his camp in the morning, multiple sets, different species, all appearing to converge on his location during the night. Then in May came the report that brought me back into the field. A ranger named Elias had gone missing. Elias was a 20-year veteran, someone who knew Glacier as well as anyone alive. He'd radioed in from a patrol cabin in the Western Valley, reporting unusual wildlife activity and saying he was going to investigate. That was the last anyone heard from him. The park superintendent organized a massive search operation, 50 rangers, volunteers, and search and rescue personnel combing 100 square miles of rugged terrain. I was assigned to the coordination center, helping manage the teams and track their progress on maps. We found Elias on the 3rd day. He was sitting outside the patrol cabin, exactly where he'd been stationed, looking unharmed. But something was wrong. He seemed dazed, distant, and he couldn't account for the 3 days he'd been missing. His last memory was going to investigate some tracks near the cabin. Then nothing until he woke up to find a search team standing over him. They brought him back to headquarters for medical evaluation. Physically, he was fine. Dehydrated, hungry, but no injuries. Mentally, that was harder to assess. He wasn't confused or disoriented. He simply had no memory of 72 hours. I visited him in the hospital in Kalispell. He was sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the mountains when I knocked on the door frame. "Mind if I come in?" He turned and studied my face. "You're from the regional office. I saw you at the command center." "That's right. Just wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." "I'm fine. Doctors say I'm fine. Everyone keeps saying I'm fine." He turned back to the window. "But I'm not fine. Something happened out there, something I can't remember, and that might be worse than remembering." I pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "Can you tell me anything? Even fragments? Dreams or impressions?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I remember the tracks. They were fresh, pressed deep into the mud near the stream. 3 different types, all around the cabin. I followed them into the trees." He paused. "And then there's nothing. Just darkness, but not empty darkness. It felt," he struggled for the word, "occupied. Like standing in a room full of people you can't see." "Do you remember anything else? Sounds? Smells?" "The smell. Yeah." He closed his eyes. "Like the forest, but concentrated. Animal musk. Pine sap. Something else. Something that made my hindbrain scream. I knew that smell. I'd encountered it 3 times before." "The tracks you followed," I said carefully. "What did they look like?" "Mixed. Some looked canine but too large. Some were bipedal, human-shaped but wrong proportions, and some—" He opened his eyes and looked at me directly. "Some looked like nothing I've ever seen, like someone crossed a human footprint with a bear track and scaled it up 50%. Sasquatch tracks." He didn't look surprised that I'd said it. Maybe, or maybe I was seeing things, stress, isolation, whatever, but his tone said he didn't believe that. "I think they let you go," I said. "Just like they let others go. But I think they wanted you to know something first, to understand something. And maybe they took that memory because I wouldn't be able to handle the truth," he finished. "Because knowing would break something in me." We sat in silence for a while. Then Elias said, "You've seen them too. I can tell by how you're not asking if I'm crazy." So I told him my story, all of it from Michigan to Montana. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he nodded slowly. "Why are they doing this?" he asked. "The pattern's changing. For years, maybe decades, they stayed hidden. avoided contact. But now they're making themselves known. Why? I don't know. Maybe we've pushed too far into their territory. Maybe the climate is changing their habitat, forcing them to adapt. Or maybe, I hesitated, maybe they're trying to communicate, to warn us. Warn us about what? That they're here, that they've always been here, and that there are boundaries we shouldn't cross. Elias was discharged 2 days later. He took early retirement, said he'd had enough of the wilderness. I didn't blame him, having 3 days erased from your memory, knowing something happened but being unable to access those memories was its own kind of horror. But his disappearance had consequences. The park superintendent ordered a temporary closure of the Western Valley. No hiking, no camping, no entry without special permission. Officially, it was for wildlife management. Unofficially, rangers were instructed to report any unusual activity immediately. I couldn't stay behind a desk after that. I requested reassignment to Glacier's field operations, and despite my recent preference for office work, it was approved immediately. They needed experienced rangers who could handle the remote areas. So in June, I was back in the wilderness. My assignment was to patrol the closed areas, document any unusual signs, and maintain the emergency shelters and cache boxes scattered throughout the backcountry. It meant days alone on the trail, camping in different locations each night, covering miles of terrain that hadn't seen human visitors in weeks. I should have been terrified. After everything I'd experienced, I should have requested a transfer to a different park, a different state, anywhere but the place where all three creatures seemed to be converging. But I wasn't terrified. I was curious. In my years encountering these beings, I'd developed a theory. The dogman was territorial, aggressive when threatened but not inherently malevolent. The Sasquatch was intelligent and generally non-hostile, even protective at times. The Wendigo was driven by hunger and madness, dangerous always. But in Montana, I'd seen them work together, coordinate, and with Elias, they'd captured and released him without harming him. That suggested intention, purpose beyond simple survival instincts. They were trying to tell us something, and I was determined to understand what. I spent 3 weeks patrolling the closed valley. I found tracks regularly, all three types, often overlapping, always moving toward or away from the same central location. A high alpine meadow, accessible only by a steep, rarely used trail. I'd marked the location on my map but hadn't approached it yet. Something told me I needed to be prepared, and I wasn't sure what preparation looked like when dealing with cryptids. In late June, I met Josiah at the ranger station. He was a wildlife biologist from the University of Montana, specifically requesting permission to study wolf-pack dynamics in the closed area. I know it's restricted, he said, spreading his research proposal on my desk. But this is the last population of wolves in the park that hasn't been studied. They've been isolated in that valley for at least 15 years. The pack structure, the hunting patterns, we could learn things that would inform conservation efforts across the entire Northwest. It's closed for a reason, I said. I know, wildlife management. But I've studied wolves my entire career. I know how to minimize disturbance. I'd be in and out in 2 weeks, just collecting audio recordings and scat samples. I looked at his proposal. He seemed competent, experienced, but I couldn't tell him the real reason the valley was closed. Couldn't explain that the wildlife we were managing walked on 2 legs and had intelligence that rivaled our own. I'll take you in, I said finally, but you work under my supervision. We stick together, we follow my protocols, and if I say we're leaving, we leave immediately. No arguments. He agreed, probably thinking I was being overly cautious. He had no idea. We left 2 days later, carrying 2 weeks of supplies and enough research equipment to fill 3 backpacks. Josiah chattered constantly as we hiked, explaining his research questions and theories about pack behavior. I let him talk. It was easier than trying to explain the growing sense of unease that increased with every mile. We reached the alpine meadow on the second day. It was beautiful in the brutal way of high elevation, stark, windswept, surrounded by jagged peaks that still held snow in their crevices. A stream ran through the center, and scattered stands of whitebark pine provided minimal shelter. And everywhere, tracks. Not wolf tracks. The other kinds. Josiah knelt to examine a particularly clear print near the stream. This is unusual. Too large for a wolf, wrong shape for a bear. What kind of animal makes a track like this? Keep your voice down, I said quietly, and don't touch anything. He looked up at me, confused. Then he saw my expression and paled. You know what made these. I know there are things in these mountains that we don't fully understand, and I know that this meadow is important to them. We shouldn't be here. Then why did you agree to bring me? Because you would have come anyway, with or without permission. At least this way I can try to keep you alive. We set up camp on the eastern edge of the meadow, in a defensible position with good sight lines. Josiah wanted to start deploying his audio equipment immediately, but I made him wait until I'd done a thorough scout of the area. What I found confirmed my fears. The meadow was a meeting place. The tracks converged from 3 different directions, suggesting the creatures came here regularly, and in the center of the meadow, near a massive boulder, the ground was worn smooth, compressed by repeated use. This was neutral ground, a place where 3 species that shouldn't coexist had found a way to communicate. I radioed back to headquarters. We're established at the high meadow, everything's fine, but I want to document this location thoroughly, might extend our stay by a few days. The response was scratchy but clear. Approved. Check in daily. That night we heard them coming. First, the howl from the north, that distinctive dogman vocalization that made my bones ache. Then from the west, the deep resonating call of the Sasquatch. And from the south, that terrible screaming cry of the Wendigo. Josiah grabbed my arm. What the hell is that? Stay calm, stay in the tent. Don't make any sudden moves. We sat in the darkness listening as the sounds grew closer. Through the tent walls I could see shadows moving, massive shapes that blocked out the stars. They were circling the meadow, approaching the center. Then, silence. I'm going to look, I whispered. Are you insane? Probably. Stay here. I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and crawled out. The meadow was bathed in moonlight, bright enough to see clearly. All 3 creatures were there, arranged around the boulder in the same triangular configuration I'd seen in Montana, but this time there was something else, a 4th presence. A man was standing in the center, between them. No, not standing, floating. His feet were several inches above the ground, his body rigid, his eyes closed. It was Elias. I took a step forward, and all 3 creatures' heads snapped toward me, but they didn't move, didn't threaten, they just watched. I walked closer, slowly, my hands raised. What are you doing to him? The Sasquatch made a low sound, almost questioning. The dogman remained motionless. The Wendigo swayed but didn't approach. Let him go, I said. Whatever this is, whatever you're doing, let him go. Elias's eyes opened, but they weren't his eyes anymore. They were glowing softly, lit from within by something that looked like moonlight filtered through water. He spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was 3 voices, overlapping, speaking in unison. We warned them. They did not listen. We showed them. They did not see. Now we take one who will remember. One who will carry the message. What message? The boundaries are dissolving. Your world and ours, once separate, now merge. You have pushed too far, taken too much, forgotten the old agreements. We are not your subjects. We are not your resources. We are the original stewards, and we demand recognition. I recognize you, I said. I've always recognized you. That's why I'm here. You are marked. Touched by 3 paths, witness to 3 truths. You walk between, neither fully theirs nor fully ours. The voices paused. But you are not enough. One voice cannot change the tide of your species. Then what do you want? We want them to remember, to fear, to respect. Elias's body slowly lowered to the ground. We return this one with memories intact. He will speak. Some will listen. Most will not. But the seeds will be planted. The glow in Elias's eyes faded. He collapsed to the ground, gasping. I ran to him, but the 3 creatures didn't stop me. They simply watched as I helped him sit up, as I checked him for injuries. Did you see? Elias asked, his voice hoarse. Did you see what they showed me? What did they show you? Everything. The history, how long they've been here, how many there are, where they live, what they know about us. He looked up at the 3 creatures. They're not animals, they're nations, civilizations. And we've been so blind, so arrogant. The Sasquatch stepped forward. It reached out one massive hand, palm up, in what looked like an offering gesture. On its palm lay 3 objects, a tuft of canine fur, a strand of reddish-brown hair, and what looked like a small carved bone. I understood. Gifts, proof, evidence that we could take back with us. I took them carefully, handling each with respect. Thank you. The creatures nodded, actually nodded, and then they were gone, moving so quickly and quietly that they seemed to simply vanish into the shadows. Josiah emerged from the tent, shaking. Tell me I didn't just see what I think I saw. I can't tell you that because you did see it. But that means everything I know about biology, about taxonomy, about possible wildlife in North America, it's all wrong. Not wrong. Incomplete. I helped Elias to his feet. There's more in these mountains than textbooks can explain. We left the meadow at first light. Elias could walk, though he was weak and disoriented. We made it back to the ranger station in 3 days, and within hours the place was swarming with federal agents. They separated us immediately, interrogated us individually, asked the same questions over and over. What did we see? What really happened? Were we sure we hadn't been exposed to hallucinogens or toxic plants? They took the physical evidence, the fur, the hair, the bone. Said they'd run tests, determine what species they came from. I never saw the results of those tests. The official report listed the incident as mass delusion caused by altitude sickness and prolonged isolation. Elias was medically retired. Josiah was strongly encouraged to pursue research in other areas, and I was transferred to yet another park, as far from Montana as possible, while still being in the continental United States. But before I left, the park superintendent called me into his office. He was an older man, 30 years in the park service, and he looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "You know they're real," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. I've known for 20 years, saw something in Yellowstone that I couldn't explain, couldn't report, couldn't forget, and I've spent 2 decades wondering if I was insane." He pulled out a folder from his desk and handed it to me. "I've been collecting these, reports from other rangers going back 50 years, hundreds of encounters, all suppressed or explained away. You're not alone in what you've seen." I opened the folder. Page after page of incidents, descriptions, locations, a pattern spanning decades, spanning the entire western United States and beyond. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because the pattern's accelerating. More sightings, more interactions, more boldness. They're making themselves known, and I think it's intentional. They're trying to communicate something, and we need people who understand that. People like you. What do you want me to do?" "Keep watching, keep documenting, and when the time comes, when the evidence becomes undeniable, be ready to speak the truth." He stood and extended his hand, "Because that time is coming. Soon." I left Glacier in August. My new assignment is in the Southwest, in a park that supposedly has no history of cryptid activity. But I know better now. They're everywhere, these hidden nations, watching from the deep places. And I've accepted my role. I'm a witness, a bridge between two worlds. And when the time comes, when the boundaries finally dissolve completely, I'll be ready to speak the truth. Because the wilderness is not empty. It never was. We just weren't looking closely enough. And now that they've decided to make themselves known, we have a choice. Acknowledge their existence and learn to coexist, or continue our willful blindness until they're forced to make themselves impossible to ignore. I know which path I'm choosing. The question is, which will you choose?